ahead and get started, and there's a pretty full audience, so I anticipate that a lot of folks will have things to say. My name's Madeline Kay. I'm one of the town council folks, and I am the council liaison to the Environmental Committee and to the Pet Restraint Subcommittee. So I want to welcome you all this morning. I want to welcome members of the Environmental Committee who are over on the side of the room, who are in attendance today as well. We have Lynn Sager, representing Shorebirds and Turtle Patrol, and we've got Tommy Manuel from the ARB and Matt Hill from Kika. Okay. Welcome again to the members of the Environmental Committee who are here. So just to recap what has happened to date, we have tackled the issue of whether to restrict some of the off-leash rules. This was all opened last February when some of the shorebird stewards brought concerns up to the town. Dogs are currently allowed, as most of you know, without a leash on the mile-long stretch of beach that goes from the beach club out to the ocean course. And this no-leash zone is not being eliminated. I think that for a couple of months there was a misperception that it was going to be cut in half or perhaps eliminated, and that is not on the table at all. The current draft ordinance proposes that the off-leash zone be reduced during the 4 months of the year when shorebirds are nesting. Leashes would be required only where there's yellow signage that indicate that there's a nesting area. So the current ordinance requires that leashes be used in designated seasonal dog use areas starting on March 15th. The proposed ordinance would require the leashes beginning 2 weeks earlier than that, on February 28th. So those are the substantive changes that have been proposed in the draft ordinance. And again, it's a draft ordinance, so there are several steps along the way that need to happen before any action is taken, including going back to the subcommittee for review after today and after all of your input, and then going to the Environmental Committee for a vote on whether to even move it forward to town council. Then there are at least two hearings at the town council, one for a first reading of an ordinance, then for the second reading. And at every step along the way, the public has got an opportunity for input. So, and that has been kind of the number one priority of this group, is to make sure that we give you every opportunity to tell us what you're thinking and to give us your thoughts and opinions on this matter. So, since this issue first came up in February, the subcommittee's actually made quite a bit of progress. We've, first off, tip of the hat to Ann McGowan, who did a very thorough, very complete audit of all the signage along the beach. And she also worked really hard on the draft ordinance. We've designed new signage that is designed to increase efforts to educate and inform the public, that both our residents and our tourists, on what are the rules around beach usage, what are some of the issues around the fragility for both turtles and for nesting shorebirds. So education, information. The signage will encourage compliance with existing rules and regulations. And it'll also increase our efforts through some monitoring of exactly who or what is entering the dunes. So to collect the data that shows who and what is having the impact on the shorebirds. And then we've worked with the resort on signage in the dunes out at the ocean course, because we've heard a lot about golfers in the dunes. So today, what happens today? First off, we're going to Mayor Belt has got a few words to say, then with the town biologists are going to review the relevant data. Then we've got some public comment from outside agencies, and I think including DNR. We've got public comment, and depending on the number of attendees, which looks to be significant, I will ask people to try to limit their remarks to about 3 minutes. I know not everybody in the audience is here and is going to be speaking, so, but I may be asking for, with some exceptions, for some time restraints. This is not designated to be a forum for question and answer. This is really to collect your input. If you ask a bunch of questions that are all related, we will try to provide good answers for you as we move forward in this process. And we will follow up with some kind of communication, whether it's more meetings, whether it's a written Q&A, but we'll provide you with some feedback. So, without further delay, Mayor Belt, would you like to say a few words?
Yes, Councilmember Kay, and thank you. Welcome, everyone. Good morning. Extraordinary turnout. I'd love to see this kind of turnout at the next council meeting. How many of you can I count on being at the next council meeting? Not a lot of raised hands, huh? This obviously an issue that inflames passions, but it's one that we've got to be respectful of each other's views and perspectives. And I want to take a few moments to level set what my expectations are about not just this meeting, because this isn't my meeting, but this process as a whole. Kiawah is a unique place in so many respects. One way in which it is unique and special is it has an extraordinarily dog-friendly set of rules and culture. And I think we want to continue to embrace that. What also makes Kiawah Island extraordinarily unique is the diversity of wildlife on our island. Where else in the world, I'm not sure anywhere else in the world, can you find the combination of our beloved bobcats, strand-feeding bottlenose dolphins, nesting loggerhead sea turtles, and migratory shorebirds in the middle of their 20,000-mile journey. And we want to be respectful of both of those unique aspects of Kiawah Island, and we have to ultimately try to continually balance competing interests and considerations and try to do so in a way that reflects changes in conditions. And I think that's what this process is all about. When this issue first arose, and I met with a number of the dog owner groups and talked about this publicly, what I said at the time was that if there's going to be any change in a long-term policy, there needs to be a rational basis for that change. And secondly, that the change needs to be reasonably related to the issue that's trying to be addressed. I stand by that. I haven't made any decision in my own mind. I'm trying to remain open-minded and objective about what's in the best interest of the community and the island as a whole. And that's what this process is about. It's about a discernment process, trying to gather information and input from all sorts of stakeholders. We have to be civil and respectful of each other's views, as I said at the outset. I feel somewhat compelled, and I wish I didn't feel compelled to do so, to express some disappointment in some of the comments, especially coming from some of the dog owners. I do not believe some of those comments are reflective of the vast majority of dog owners, but there were enough of them that I want to specifically address them. One is I will not countenance any blaming or demonizing of the town staff, particularly the wildlife department and the town biologist. Their job is to protect our wildlife. When we recently released our town survey, the department that got the service, that got the highest rating in terms of satisfaction was protecting our wildlife. We were talking about bobcats. I suspect there would be a very different tone and tenor about all of this. Now, to be fair, and Jim and Aaron have had to deal with this with me in senior staff meetings, their view is just their view. It's an input. It's an expert opinion, which I highly value, but at the end of the day, it's not necessarily dispositive, and it's not necessarily dispositive in this instance, because again, we have to balance competing interest and policy considerations. But please, don't blame the town biologist for doing their job on behalf of all of us. Two, there have been a number of statements to suggest that somehow this issue is driven by outside external interest. that special interests are taking over the island. As Councilmember Kay noted at the outset, this was really driven initially by our shorebird stewards, who are residents as well. They're residents just as much as all the dog owners on the island, and we are one of those. So again, please be mindful of the fact that we're all living on this island and we all want what's best for the island. We're going to have slightly different perspectives about what that entails. The third thing is a number of the comments suggested that somehow this is being jammed down people's throats and is a rush process. Anything but that. As noted, this started back in January or February. This hearing is emblematic of the fact that we're going to be fairly rigorous and disciplined about this. There's no question in the past, and I've commented on this in other contexts, that when something emanates from the staff or in a committee, there's always an uproar and people think, my God, the town is doing something. We're a long way from that. This has been a process, and I want to commend Councilmember Kay for her leadership on this. She was the one that made sure that there was a very open and public process, bringing together different stakeholder interests. She was committed to holding this public hearing so everybody has an opportunity to provide input. This hasn't come to the council yet. Maybe it never does, but if it does, you will have further opportunities for public comment. So I'll leave it at that. Just again, I welcome all points of view. I'm learning about this issue. I've been reading a lot of data, but I haven't absorbed all of it yet. I encourage everybody else to be as open-minded as possible as well, and sit back and try to figure out collectively what we can do in the best interest of our little slice of paradise. Thank you, Councilmember Kay.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. First on the agenda? You guys? Okay, Aaron? Jim? For those of you who don't know Aaron Given, he is one of the town biologists, as is the other person sitting to my left, Jim Jordan.
I had to do this? Oh.
I could figure that one out.
Thanks, Neil. Okay, well, thanks everybody for coming. I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the reasons why this proposal came about. And first, I'm just going to start talking a little bit about the red knots. So I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with red knots. We have been talking about red knots on this island for many, 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 many years. This place is an incredible place for red knots. It is one of the few places in the world where we have huge concentrations of red knots that stop over here for many months at a time on their journey to the Arctic before they breed. Red knots are here from March 1st through about May 15th. That's kind of their stopover period. We do have some birds that are here in the wintertime, but those numbers really start to show up around March 1st, and they build over the course of the spring to several thousand. And about May 15th, they do depart and they head north to the Arctic breeding grounds. In 2014, they were listed as federally threatened. Their population over the last probably 25 years has crashed due to a number of reasons, which I think Felicia might talk about that in her presentation. The Kiawah Seabrook area, these beaches, we host about 40% of the entire eastern population of red knots during spring migration. So almost 40% of the entire population passes or stops on Kiawah, and that was found by a recent study that was done actually here on Kiawah and Seabrook. Red knots also undertake one of the longest migrations, about 19,000 miles round trip from the southern tip of South America to the northern breeding grounds in the Arctic. And they have found when red knots are here, one of their main jobs is to fatten up. So they're here mainly to eat a lot of food, put on lots of weight so that they can make a flight from here almost nonstop to the Arctic. So banding studies that have been done on Kiawah has found that red knots can put on enough weight on Kiawah to fly from here all the way to the Arctic, and they don't have to stop again. They almost nearly double their body weight. So during that time when they have to feed a lot, they're constantly feeding, because in order to put that much weight on, they have to eat almost all the time. So that's basically, at high tide, their food source, which is coquina clams and horseshoe crab eggs, that's covered up at high tide, so they have to roost during that time. So the rest of the time they are spent feeding. And when they're not feeding, they have to rest because they've spent all that other time feeding. So disturbance to these birds, which can come in lots of forms, people, bicyclists, dogs, everything, causing these birds to fly, causes them to expend energy that they would otherwise not need to do if they were allowed to just kind of feed on their own. Another thing we have is the formation of a new shorebird nesting area that has formed outside of the critical habitat area. And we've also experienced a loss of nesting habitat on the east end as well. So over the last 40 years or so, shorebird populations across North America has decreased by about 70%. Kiawah's nesting shorebirds include Wilson's plovers, which are state threatened, American oyster catchers, and least terns, which is also state threatened. There are willets, but I'll just kind of throw that in there as a side. They sometimes nest on the beach, but mainly on the back side of the dunes and closer to the marsh area. So most of these birds are laying their eggs directly on the sand. So they find a flat area, sometimes in the dunes, but it's mainly they just form this little divot in the ground, and they just plop their eggs in there. Sometimes they'll line it with some rack, maybe some shells, but a lot of times it's just directly on the sand. Sometimes there's vegetation around. In the case of Wilson's plovers, they do like to choose their sites a little higher and maybe within a little bit more vegetation. So a little higher in the dunes where there's a little bit more green plants and things like that. But oyster catchers generally are just laying them directly on the sand, and least terns as well. So up until 2023, all of our suitable nesting habitat was located in our critical habitat areas, which are that area on the east end, which is just east of the Ocean Course Clubhouse, and on the west end, which is kind of west of that no dog sign, kind of halfway down between Beachwalker County Park and the inlet. Nesting habitat in the critical habitat area we have found has declined by 55% between 2020 and 2024. So currently there's about 28.7 acres of nesting habitat out in the east end right now. And over the last, so and I'll go into the reasons why, but it's essentially erosion from high tides and storms has caused a lot of those nesting area to have been kind of washed away, shifted around a little bit, so that there's just a lot less habitat for all the birds that were nesting in there prior to. Now, as that east end has kind of shifted and moved around, sand has kind of built up a little bit just west of the ocean course, which has kind of built that area up just a little bit, which has kind of actually made that area suitable for birds to nest in now. And that was evidenced by birds nesting in that in 2023 and in 2024. And that new area is approximately 9.25 acres. Just that area just west of the ocean course. So let me show you some maps here. So this is, it's easier to see on this little screen, but that represents what the suitable nesting habitat back in 2020 looked like. So all the areas highlighted in red was areas above the high tide, which had a substantial amount of sand, which wasn't getting overwashed a lot of times. And that was all areas that was available for shorebirds to nest in. So that totaled about 63.2 acres. And this is what it looks like today. So you can see how much that is broken apart because we've got inlets that have formed. We've got sand that has shifted and moved around. And in doing so, what it has done is eliminated a lot of that available nesting habitat for our shorebirds. So currently, minus that 9.25 to 9.3 acres to the right or the left of the ocean course, that acre now only has 28.7 acres left for shorebirds to nest in. So if we were to add then in that new area, we would still be well less than what we had just 4 years ago, which would total about 38 acres. So as we have discussed a little bit, nesting shorebirds are extremely vulnerable to human and dog disturbance that can lead to nest abandonment and failure. So I'm just going to read, this is kind of some excerpts from a few different studies that have been done over the body of literature that is out there over shorebird disturbance there's a lot. So we've kind of found some here, but so a study in 2007 demonstrated that the highest frequency of shorebird nest absences were in response to people accompanied by unleashed dogs. And this was more than double than that of people that approached alone or with a leash dog. Studies from elsewhere in the world reveal that nesting shorebirds will respond from more than double the distance, flush more frequently, and remain off their nests for longer periods of time when a person was accompanied by a dog than when alone. And lastly, chicks are highly sensitive to dogs' presence on beaches. This causes them to stop feeding from greater distances, and then they spend longer periods of time hiding, which obviously if they can't feed, they're not going to be able to grow enough to kind of become, on their own. So these disturbances are also lethal to eggs and chicks. As I mentioned, these eggs are laid directly on the sand. So if a dog or whatever, if the adult is disturbed and they have to leave the nest, those eggs are exposed on the sand. It's hot, and that sun can hit those eggs and cause those eggs basically to cook, and then those eggs won't hatch. And also it'll cause, if there's multiple disturbances across a day. So if this just happens once or twice, it's probably not a huge deal, but multiple disturbances over the course of a day builds up until, they're just not going to be very successful. So this graph here, I can kind of show you a little bit. This is from a study as well, but you can kind of show that it's hard to read that, and I'm having trouble reading that access. Let me see if I can. So on the On the y-axis, it says percentage of birds that flushed when disturbed. So when a person is just walking, so they've got it broken up into dunes and shores. They also have a category called paths, which probably don't apply to us here so much, but when a person is walking in the dunes, a shorebird response, it will be about 50% of the time it will flush. If a person is just walking along the shore, then that response is really, really low, probably less than 5%. And you can see then when a dog enters the picture, either on a leash or off leash, how much those responses change. So as a dog kind of gets close, so these birds don't see dogs as dogs. They see these dogs as predators. They think it's a fox, a coyote, whatever predator that they have evolved with over the many, many millions of years, they recognize that as a predator. So they see that as a threat, and they don't know that that dog's necessarily leashed, but if they do see a dog off of a leash, that dog is approaching in a quick pace, so they think that is a bigger threat. So dogs off leash pose a greater risk or threat to shorebirds than one that's on. But as you can tell from there, that even dogs on leash, the birds respond in a much higher rate. And the bottom one is also, it's basically saying very similar things. It's just a different graph from a different paper. All right, I think that's all I got. Jim's going to take over from here. Can I leave this? No, I'm good.
All right, thanks, Aaron. And again, just thank you all for coming. And for those who don't know me, I know I've been introduced already, but I'm Jim Jordan. I'm the biologist. I guess technically my title is Conservation Director, but I like to refer to myself as a biologist. I've been here 25 years. And I'm just going to run through, Councilwoman Kay talked a little bit about how we got here, the background, but I just want to go through it and just make sure everyone understands. So this all started back in February of 2024, where the town's environmental committee was tasked with looking into this issue. And as the mayor and Madeline have suggested, it was initiated by, our shorebird stewards here at Kiawah. And so we formed a pet restraint subcommittee back in February, and it started meeting in March. In April of 2024, the environmental committee first looked at a draft ordinance change, which the committee actually unanimously voted to move forward to council. It did not move forward and was sent back to the environmental committee to take another look at it. And I'll show you kind of what that initial proposal was, and then where we are now. And so again, that went back to environmental committee. The pet restraint subcommittee continued to meet. We did add 2 new members, property owner representatives, basically tried to get one from the dog side and one from the shorebird side. And so that group met over a couple of months and worked together collaboratively to come up with some, with a couple of tweaks and kind of changed, what we're proposing. And so that brought us to today. So, my job right now is to tell you what is proposed as clearly as I can. So hopefully I can do that. So one big change was our current ordinance didn't have definitions for a lot of terms that, were potentially a little bit confusing. So we've added definitions, and I'm happy to read all of those. But I probably won't. I'll just touch on them briefly. You've got the handout. Certainly you can look at the draft ordinance. But we wanted to define what critical habitat was because, there are different types of critical habitat, right? There's federal critical habitat that's established, by the Fish and Wildlife Service for a certain species, right? So all of Kiawah, the entire Kiawah Island beach is federal critical habitat for loggerhead turtles. Red knots. But town designated critical habitat is different. It's designated by the town and again currently exists on the far eastern and western ends of the island. We just clearly define dawn and dusk, define leash to put a requirement that a leash over 16 feet is not allowed. We better defined nuisance, and then we created this well, I guess a new designation called suitable nesting habitat. And that was kind of part of the compromise, if you will. And so basically, and we'll talk about how it works within the ordinance, but suitable nesting habitat, is identified on an annual basis, and it's potentially going to change over time. It's going to change over time. Kiawah's beach is very dynamic, especially on the eastern end. And so, obviously suitable nesting habitat is exactly what you think it would be, right? It's areas where shorebirds can nest, and the habitat that they need is there. We also better define what under control is. And now we'll move into some maps and kind of get to the first couple of proposed changes. So the first one affects the seasonal dog use area. So that's the area in green on this map. Currently, dogs can be off leash from November 1st through March 15th. The only proposed change here is to shorten that by 2 weeks. So the new proposed dates for this area would be November 1st through February 28th. And obviously this is primarily done, we're proposing this primarily to protect red knots, but also other migrating shorebirds that are here, right? So in our current regulations, we've got about 2 weeks when we could have big concentrations of red knots here, where we've got dogs off leash on most of our beach. So that's the first proposed change. Regarding critical habitat, so those are the town designated critical habitat on either end of the island. There are no changes to the size or location of those areas. They were established back in 2004, and dogs are not allowed into these areas at any time. So no change there. And here's why most of you are here, the dog use area. So this current area extends from just east of the beach club all the way to the Ocean Course Clubhouse. It's currently 1.2 miles long, and dogs are currently allowed off leash all year during daylight hours. So the initial recommendation that the Environmental Committee looked at back in April of 2024 was to convert the eastern half of the dog use zone into a seasonal dog use area. So the big green area we just looked at, it would just change this area to that, which would allow dogs off leash from November 1st through March 1st, assuming the new date change in that type of area. So dogs would have been allowed off leash for 4 months out of the year there. The remaining dog use area, effectively half of the 1.2 miles, is a little over 1,000 yards long. So that would have remained in the initial proposal. And again, this was done to protect nesting shorebirds, but also would obviously protect migrating red knots as well. Would give them an area on the eastern end where there would not be dogs during the time period that they're here. So that was the initial April recommendation. The current recommendation, again, we talked about suitable nesting habitat and how the proposed ordinance defines that. So the idea here is that if suitable nesting habitat is present, so what this shows is basically where suitable nesting habitat was in 2024. We don't know where it'll be in 2025. It could be smaller than that. It could be slightly larger than that. It's virtually impossible for that area to extend much more to the west, just because as you get further away from the inlet and you get more vegetated dunes, it's just not suitable nesting habitat for shorebirds. They want to be near an inlet. That's where they want to be. So that area is not going to grow considerably. And if we have a storm, it could potentially go away in 2025. So the idea was, okay, initially we were just going to say half of the area should be, converted so that it protects nesting shorebirds. Now the thinking is, okay, if we have good habitat there, then we should have some protection for the birds that are nesting there. And so again, suitable habitat would be identified on an annual basis. If it's present, it would be marked with signage, and then dogs would be required to be on leash adjacent to that area during the nesting season, which is generally April 1st through July 1st. It could extend into July, but obviously once nesting is wrapped up, those signs would be removed. And so this would be a temporary designation, as I've already said, to protect nesting shorebirds, and it would still be a dog use area. We wouldn't change, the dog use area would still be 1.2 miles long. It would just be a temporary change for no more than 4 months out of the year when birds are actively nesting, if good habitat is there. So in this current proposal, dogs would be allowed off leash no less than August 1st through April 1st. So a minimum of 8 months, the entire 1.2 miles would be available for dogs to be off leash. And then the very last change, which I don't think we've gotten any comments about, this was really done simply because it's related. It's in the same section of the ordinance, and we had some conflicting language that talked about specific types of signs that needed to be used in critical habitat area, and that was in conflict with the regulations for those areas. So we were simply removing the reference to specific signage. So that is all for me. And then next, before we open it up, we've got Felicia Sanders from DNR, who's just going to talk a little bit about, again, shorebirds and disturbance, and just provide some information for you guys.
Well, thanks so much for allowing me to speak at this important meeting. Felicia Sanders, I'm the project lead for the seabird and shorebirds for our state. I've been in this position 24 years and been lucky enough to go to the Arctic for part of 5 of those summers to see these amazing birds nest in the Arctic. So one bird we've been focusing on with our project are red knots. This map to the right is a track of a bird that we caught at DeVoe Bank near here, put a tracking device on it. It left South Carolina, went far up to the Arctic nesting areas, back down to Terra del Fuego, the very tip of South America, and then made its way up to Kiawah the next year. So each year, this bird is making a journey of 19,000 miles. And one of the reasons we're working on them is because they're federally threatened, as Aaron said. They've, some of the data that led to their being threatened was they're declining in different areas by 70% in the early 2000s. And then a paper that just came out in 2023 showed 90% decline of rufous red knots in their last 3 generations. So this paper was just trying to look at really recent trends of a lot of shorebird species. So you kind of see, I kind of read a lot of stuff and you, whoops, sorry about that. And, kind of just wonder, is that happening here? Well, I had a kind of small grant to hire Janet Tebow. She's now permanently with DNR in 2012 to count knots at Kiawah. And she saw minimum flock size of 8,000. And then this past year, the largest flock we've seen is about 1,500. And then here are some numbers, 2022, 3,000 to 5,000 knots. 2023, about 2,500. And so we're seeing declines here in South Carolina. So these big flyway papers that I'm reading, I think they're true. They really are declining. And we have focused a lot of our project at Kiawah and Seabrook. And that's because recent research that I was part of shows that somewhere minimum a quarter of this subspecies is stopping at Kiawah and Seabrook to feed, to rest, and prepare for their journey to the Arctic. It could be up to 40% of the entire subspecies is stopping here. So that's huge, and they're stopping for, about a month and a half on average. And here, as Aaron was saying, they're getting fat, and that fat is energy to take them to the Arctic to nest on a really snowy tundra. They need to be really fit and fat to survive the breeding season. And they show up here, if you've watched Knots, they show up here gray, and they're also taking some of that food and putting on these beautiful rufous red feathers, their breeding plumage. So overall, early spring, this beach is probably the most important place on the entire Atlantic Flyway, South America, Central North America, for this subspecies. I've also worked some on Wilson's plovers. I led a statewide survey and we published it 2009, 2011. We actually walked almost the whole coast of South Carolina, so we haven't had the energy or youth to do it again. But we counted 376 pairs, which is not a lot for our entire state. At that time, 27 pairs were on Kiawah. And then Aaron said maybe about 16 pairs now at Kiawah. So this is another bird that's really in trouble. They historically nested up to New Jersey and Maryland. Their range is contracting, which is not really good for a species. Like the last nest in Maryland was seen in 1985. Species of high concern on the U.S. shorebird plan. Maryland and Virginia, they're state endangered, and as Aaron said, in South Carolina, they're state threatened. And they also probably migrate pretty far. Some of the birds banded in Kiawah by Aaron have been seen in South America in the winter. So they're making nice journeys as well. And kind of as Aaron said, they begin nesting in April. They're really cryptic on the sand flats, just put their eggs right in the sand. Very difficult to see, even for biologists. Sometimes they're hard to find their nests. And the chicks, they're little cotton balls with legs. As soon as they hatch, they're precocial, they're able to run. And so they really use the entire beach. You know, you kind of think of their nesting habitat just up in the dunes, but actually that's just when they're inside the egg. Once they can run, they're gonna go down to the rack line, they'll go down to the water, they may go to the backside of the island. Really that whole stretch in front of where they nested is their nesting habitat. And unfortunately, almost all the shorebirds are in steep decline by about 70% in the last 40 years. And one of the key problems is human disturbance. But it's not just in South Carolina, it could be in Brazil and Argentina and all along the coast. There's just so many people that live here are moving to the coast, I mean, me included, that the disturbance is increasing at all of these bird stops. And, you know, just to briefly touch on stuff that Aaron touched on, there have been really amazing research projects. You know, it takes a lot of money, many years, and including these papers, these research have been published. That takes a couple years. But we're certain that human disturbance reduces the number of shorebirds in an area. It can decrease the shorebird's nest success, lowers the adult survival. That paper was done in South Carolina. And dogs are even worse. And Aaron talked a lot about that. Just they mimic all the predators that these shorebirds evolve with, foxes and wolves, and so they're far more afraid of a four-legged furry animal when it approaches them, whether they're resting, feeding, or nesting, than a human. I cover the entire coast, and like many docks, I see these coyote decoys. They put them out there because people don't want birds on their docks, and, you know, because birds poop and it makes a mess. And so you notice they put a coyote because they know birds are far more frightened of that image than like a human scarecrow. So as I said, we've just focused a lot of our just time, but also our DNR money here at Kiawah. Last year we paid for a DNR employee to just be out on the beach, educate people about the birds with a spotting scope and just warn them to stay away from the knots, from the Wilson's plovers, but also to be, just to watch them from afar. So I only just put this up because this place is one of the most important places that I work in the entire state. And I will continue to put resources, including trying to get grants to work here, because this is a really special place, like they said, a place with wildlife and people.
Are we allowed to ask a question? Are we allowed to ask a question?
Well, how about I finish and then you could? Or I don't know what the protocol is.
Just a point of you want to ask just a point of clarification?
I'm curious, have you personally seen dogs dig up like turtle egg nests? I just, I'm out on the beach a lot and I've never, ever seen any dogs digging at nests or they're never.
Yeah,
So I don't know.
I don't work on sea turtles, and I have
Oh,
not.
well, I just saw on your slide, it said that they.
Yeah, this is, that really was, so this isn't just, kind of hearsay. This is, this is a summary of published research papers. So, at first I put all the citations up there and I thought, oh my gosh, what is that going to mean to you? But each of these are a peer-reviewed, published scientific study. And then finally, I've kind of been through some of this process. I work for DNR. This is private land. I'm not here to recommend what you do or tell you what to do. It's not, not my property. But DNR owns 10 barrier islands, and we really had very few camping dog restriction rules, really because we didn't need them. The coast of South Carolina wasn't that developed when we acquired these properties. Shore burns weren't in such decline, so everything was okay. But more and more people are coming to the islands, and I had witnessed sort of the same thing, birds being disturbed, our birds that are nesting there declining. And so we proposed having some camping and dog restriction areas. But, working with the most important places, these will have the restrictions, and parts of the beaches that don't. But we're an agency to protect wildlife, but we're also to provide recreational opportunities. So we went through a very lengthy process of surveying the public. And it wasn't just an online survey, because maybe the local boater doesn't go online very often. So we actually got out on the beach and asked people with dogs, people fishing, what are your priorities for the future of these beaches, shorebirds, sea turtles? And I was actually really surprised. 90% said they were very interested in protecting shorebirds and sea turtles. And almost everyone, 90%, thought the presence of dogs was a threat to wildlife. And almost everybody, majority of people said, yeah, we're willing to sacrifice, some of our what we can do to protect this wildlife as the wildlife biologists advise. So I just kind of, maybe the only suggestion I have is find out what the public's priorities are the people at Kiawah, what's your priority? And then this is a new time. These birds are really declining. They're really, we want to allow them to exist for the next generation. So, thank you.
Thank you, Felicia. Okay, we will now enter into the public comment portion of this meeting, and I'm going to invite our first, Lynn.
Madeline, I'd just like to address the question that came up for Felicia. We have never on Kiawah had the experience of dogs digging into turtle nests. So I don't know where you may have heard that. Maybe it was just prompted by what was on the slide on a study, but that is not an issue here.
Hot dogs. Thank you.
Okay, so our first speaker we're going to go basically in order of the sign-in sheet. and I'll call out names so that you can prepare yourself. But I appreciate that many of the folks who signed up just in attendance don't have anything to say. Anyway, our first speaker is going to be Brian CV. I mentioned earlier that Ann McGowan has been an essential member of the subcommittee, and Ann unfortunately couldn't be with us today, but she asked if Brian could speak in her place.
And by the way, let me note, Madeline, that I should have acknowledged in my initial remarks how constructive Ann has been in this process on behalf of the dog owners. I've been copied on all the internal emails, extraordinarily thoughtful, detailed. She clearly does her homework and a very effective advocate, but I suspect you'll step in and fill her shoes very well today.
Well, thank you, Mayor. I was going to say,
Sir, if you did not sign up, when she goes through the list, if there's anyone else that wishes to speak, you will have an opportunity to speak.
okay, thank you, Councilwoman Kay and Mayor Belt. My name is Brian Seavey, and my wife and I reside at 26 Ocean Course Drive. We own a little Cavalier King Charles Spaniel that we both walk on the little path, and we take him regularly to the beach. I should say, too, for those of you that think maybe I'm just one-sided, I also am a bird lover. My daughter and I took a trip to Argentina and Antarctica earlier this year, and we spent many, many hours studying birds. So I do enjoy the birds. One of the things I did want to start out is saying that I am filling in for Ann McGowan. She's been a representative of the dog owners on the subcommittee. She has done an outstanding job. She spent countless hours. I am a poor substitute for her, but I'll try to do my best. But I do want to thank her for all her efforts. And I also want to say I appreciate the opportunity to appear here today. Our group that I'm sort of representing, which is more than 100 dog owners, is committed to working cooperatively and courteously with everyone. And we recognize that there are strongly held views on both sides. One of the things I want to emphasize today in my remarks is that in our view, a balance needs to be done. We are not simply a nature preserve. We are an island that has people, that has tourism, that have moved here because they want to have the ability to have their dogs off leash. And so there's a balance that needs to be done. But we're committed to working cooperatively. And I'd also like to say that most of the proposed ordinance, we have no objection to. We're in favor of, and I think Ann actually did a good job of helping draft some of those. So I want to emphasize that. There really are two key provisions that we have an objection to, and I'll address those in a minute. I did prepare a PowerPoint presentation. Councilwoman Kay asked me not to display it, but she made hard copies available. So for those of you that want it, I've made it available to you, but I'm not going to display it on the board. What I'd like to do this morning is briefly do four things. Explain who it is we represent, let you know that we support most of the proposed changes, explain the two provisions that we object to and why, and then make a suggestion for next steps forward. I do want to emphasize for the record that I think it's fair to say that our group as a whole vigorously objects to the two provisions that are at issue that would impact the dog leash area. And maybe before I start, I could just get a show of hands. I'm not sure how many people here are dog owners, but how many people are here to express their opposition to that part of the provision? It's a fairly significant number. All right, well, so with that background, let me just give you a few minutes on who we represent and why they're so passionate about this. There are about 100 plus homeowners, most of whom, but not all of them, own dogs. And I should say that we highly value and responsibly use the dog use area. I think you'll see that the dog owners keep the dogs away from the dunes. They're very sensitive about not letting dogs chase the birds. They discourage that. They clean up their waste. In fact, I've seen many people picking up trash as part of the dog owners and carrying it back to the receptacles. I must admit I do that myself. And we try to prevent disruption to other beach owners and their enjoyment of the beach. Now, I will say we're on the beach at all times of the day or night. And without exception, I think it's a fair statement that few dog owners are violating the rules. They're very, very conscientious. In contrast, what we do see is, unfortunately, we see other people, golfers that are coming down into the dunes that are disturbing that area. And we also observe other things that, frankly, in our view, are more of a threat to the birds than the dogs. For example, you've got the beach patrol trucks driving up and down the beach. That obviously is a major, major disruption to on the beach area. You also mentioned coyotes earlier, and as we talked about, you've got golfers coming down through the dunes. So I want to emphasize that the members of our group are very committed to working responsibly and to making sure that the rules are followed. Now, I mentioned to you that we support a majority of the recommendations. We unanimously support the town's mission of protecting and preserving the community's character and our unique natural environment. I don't think anybody is against that. But the reality is that we live in an island that is not just, as I said, a nature reserve. There is a dual reality here. The island is a place where owners live, tourists come to visit, and businesses operate. And the businesses I would include, by the way, the folks that rent the beach umbrellas that are down on the beach. So you've got to balance all of these interests. And in our view, compromises are not only necessary and essential, but it's fundamental to balance these two issues. So as I said, we unanimously support the majority of the subcommittee's recommendation because we believe those provisions are based on facts and data, and they are reasonable responses to achieve that necessary compromise. And let me just spend a minute talking about what I'll say are the 5 aspects of the committee's recommendations that we support, and I think Mr. Jordan did a good job of going through some of those. So one of the first recommendations was to add new beach and boardwalk signage. I think Ann was instrumental in that, if I remember correctly. She did a whole survey on signage. And the point of that is to raise awareness and to educate the beachgoers about both the shorebirds and the rules for the dogs. So we unanimously support that. That was based on a detailed survey that I think Ann did in July of '24. The second thing that's part of the recommendation is to add a dedicated code enforcement officer who would enforce all the beach rules. Again, we strongly support that. The third recommendation was to have increased collaboration by the town with the resort, with Kika, with the club, and the rental entities to enhance the awareness of the beach rules and to educate folks about the wildlife. Obviously a good thing. We're supportive of that and want to help with that. The fourth thing that we were in support of is negotiating by the town with the resort to try to end the golfers and the caddies going into the dunes, which would be either suitable or critical nesting habitat. And I would note that the golfers and the caddies going into the dunes are frequently cited as perhaps the most egregious violators and the biggest risk to nesting shorebirds up in that area. And then lastly, as I think Mr. Jordan mentioned, there was quite a bit of clarification in the statute. There were definitions added. I think Ann pointed out that the old statute really didn't practice what we lawyers call best legislative policies. It wasn't drafted very clearly. And so those revisions are intended to clarify that, and we agree with that. All right, now let's turn to the 2 points that we do object to. There are 2 provisions of the statute or the proposed ordinance that we object to. The first is in section 502B, which says that pets are not permitted in town-designated critical habitats, including but not limited to. And what the issue there is that we have no objection to dogs being banned as they are in the far east and far western areas, but we do have an objection to some portion of the dog use area being designated as a critical habitat, and the same about 502D, which says that pets are not permitted to enter suitable nesting habitats. And our concern there is that you can just designate any portion of that area as a suitable nesting habitat. Now, we have 3 reasons for our objections. First, and most importantly, is that there is no data today to support the broad restrictions that are being proposed within the current dog use area. And I'm going to address that in more detail because that's one of our fundamental objections is the lack of data. The second is we have a very significant concern that the proposed revision would grant unfettered authority to the town staff to designate any area of the 10-mile beach as either a critical or a suitable habitat, which would thereby prohibit dogs entirely or require leashes. And the third is that the provisions run counter to Kiawah's dog-friendly culture. And I think that's a significant one. From our perspective, these 2 provisions are frankly a solution in search of a problem because we have not identified any data that would suggest that something needs to be changed in this area of the beach. So let me address each of those one at a time if I could. Let's start with the absence of data. And I think it's important to put into context why it's so important to have data before you make a change. Okay, this is the only space for our dogs to be able to exercise off-leash on the entire island. There is no designated dog park that they can go to. And I think if we had vets here, they would explain that it's critical for animals like dogs to be able to socialize and play together in that kind of an environment. And for those of you that have ever seen the yappy hour with all the dogs down there around 4 o'clock, it's quite a scene. You've got dogs everywhere that are socializing with each other, they're exercising, and it's important for their physical and mental health. The current off-leash area also represents a very small percentage of the total Kiawah area beach. It's probably less than 10%. And so we're talking about a small area for our dogs to exercise, and the risk here is that it's going to be reduced even more. And I would add that the ARB policies make fenced-in yards rare, and when they are approved, which is very rarely, they are very expensive. So that's the context for why it's critical that if you're going to make a change to this area, you've got to have solid data and evidence to support that change. In our view, the proposed revisions are based on theoretical, not actual concerns. Now, we have seen no data to demonstrate that nesting shorebirds are adversely affected by the year-round dog leash area. In fact, no data exists that we're aware of to even provide a baseline for assessing the shorebirds' welfare on the island as a whole. Let me spend just a minute talking about the 3 studies that the island cited, or that the town cited in its October 10th email blast, and I think Mr. Given referenced those this morning. Those 3 studies were from Australia and California, and they weren't specific to Kiawah Island. All they did was look at the general impact of dogs on shorebird nesting areas. Those studies would only be relevant here if they were paired with actual evidence that a substantial number of shorebirds on Kiawah are nesting and being disturbed in the dog leash area. Otherwise, they really don't tell us anything. Now, the town staff did share, I believe, with Ann and maybe others, one specific Kiawah data point, and that was a 3-day count that they did some time ago, in which they identified 16 Wilson plover nests, 7 American oystercatcher nests, and about 25 leased tern nests. So they went out and they counted those. As I understand it, every single one of those nests, with one exception, was in the critical habitats on the far east or the far west of the island. Those are areas that are already protected, where dogs can't go. The only nest that they identified one in the dog use area, and I might add that was not a red knot nest. So there was one nest that was identified in there. The rest were in the critical wildlife areas at the far west and the far east of the island. That is what we would call anecdotal, not scientific evidence. A single nest which, by the way, we haven't, as far as we can tell, couldn't even tell whether it was from this year or not, is not sufficient as a justification for changing the ordinance. Now, our group raised this lack of data back in April with the subcommittee, but unfortunately it didn't seem to get any response. And in our view, there is no reasonable basis for moving forward with these proposed revisions without data. Data is key. The proposed revisions are at best premature and frankly might arguably be considered legally arbitrary and capricious if they don't have data to support them. Now, what did we suggest as a process? And I would reiterate, this is what we proposed today. We suggested that the committee first determine whether this anecdotal evidence justifies spending time and money on a scientifically robust study. If the commission of the study is appropriate, then we should have a study, determine if a problem exists, and then assess solutions. But it doesn't make any sense, in our view, to start proposing solutions until we assess whether an issue exists. We would respectfully suggest that the 2025 nesting season provides an excellent opportunity to gather relevant data. We could assess population counts and look at actual nesting locations, and then we could determine whether anything needed to be done. But pending data, there should be no changes to the current policy. Now, the second reason that we object is because we have a concern that the language as drafted provides what I will call unfettered authority to the town staff to designate any portion of the dog leash area as either a critical or a suitable nesting habitat. Now, as I think everyone knows, the critical habitats are the far west and far east parts of the island, but the current ordinance would allow the staff to designate any portion of the dog use area right now a critical habitat without providing any notice to anyone or any review by the town council. All they would have to do is put up a sign. So there's no process outlined and no approval from elected officials required. And this is even more of a concern when you look at the fact that the staff could also designate an area in our dog use area as what's called a suitable nesting habitat. Now, these are areas where the shorebirds theoretically could nest, but you don't actually have to have a nest present. And so what the staff could do is just put up a sign, again, without any review or by elected officials and no notice, that the area is now a suitable nesting habitat, and all of a sudden we wouldn't be allowed to have any dogs either in the area or would have to be on the leash in an area adjacent to that. And I might point out that I've been confused about what that means. If you designated an area as a suitable nesting habitat, and then you said the dogs had to be on a leash adjacent to that, I'm not sure what that means. That's not defined. Does that mean from the sign to the water, or does it mean on either side? It's just very vague and very undefined. So in our view, there's too much discretion and too much vagueness in that language for it to go forward. And then third, and perhaps most importantly from our perspective, besides the lack of data, is that we believe this proposal is contrary to the very ethos of Kiawah Island. Kiawah Island is a dog-friendly island. It has a culture of allowing dogs and their owners to socialize on the beach. Owners, guests, and visitors are drawn to the island as a place to enjoy time with their dogs on the beach. And this is confirmed by the fact that you have an abundance of dogs on the beach every single day. That's perhaps the best evidence of the ethos of this island. The resort, the rental property entities, Kika, and even the town itself tout the dog-friendly island ethos of Kiawah, and they specifically reference the dog off-leash area in their marketing. I would point out that the club, the Kiawah Island Club, invested heavily to build a parking lot and a dedicated boardwalk for dog owners to be able to use and to get to the off-leash area. So they made a substantial investment in that. Many property owners, like myself, chose our homes on that part of the island so that we could walk to the off-leash part of the beach. So they relied on the fact that this is an island that welcomes dogs off the leash. I would point out that these stakeholders have significant financial investments and that the town should not arbitrarily ignore those interests, especially in the absence of data to justify the change. So we would believe that only a data-driven and frankly a compelling justification could warrant such a drastic change to the current dog use area. All right, so my last point, what is our suggestion for going forward? And again, let me say I appreciate everything in terms of your cooperation here, Councilwoman McKay, with giving me extra time. We have been engaged in a pragmatic and proactive approach for some time, and I'm happy to say that after today, I'm going to pass the baton back to Ann so that she can pick this up. But what we would be supportive of is, as I said, assessing whether or not a study makes sense. And if a study makes sense, to conduct that study, to assess the issues, and then to reconvene to determine a fair and equitable solution. But pending that, what we request that the Environmental Committee do is table the 2 objectionable portions of the revisions and to approve the remainder of the subcommittee recommendations. And that's our request for today. I don't know if anyone has any questions. I'm happy to answer them. Or
Thank you very much, Brian.
Brian, I do. Madam Chair, if I might, a few questions. You are a very effective advocate, and you well stepped into Ann's shoes. I have no doubt about that. A couple questions in follow-up, because I think you've raised a number of very valid points and concerns. You've said, the emphasis on no data. So, and you expressed concerns, and I've conveyed the same concerns to staff about this concept of suitable nesting habitat without actually being nesting habitat. But if there is demonstrable evidence or data that the nesting habitat, because of topographic changes further east, has expanded, there is actual data, that therefore I assume you and the dog owners would then be supportive of some policy changes.
yeah, I can speak for myself, and I guess on behalf of those that are willing to let me speak for them. That's certainly true, Mayor. And I think the key at that point would be what compromise could we reach? That would be the key. We are not saying that if there is evidence that, we're just one-sided on this. We want to work cooperatively.
Appreciate that. Second point, you talked about the unfettered authority accorded to town staff in the ordinance. I've expressed some issues with regard to that as well. So if the authority were actually fettered rather than unfettered, would that give you some more comfort? Either there were some specific triggers and or there had to be a subsequent process. Either you could say the mayor or the town council, and you could onboard all of that, your ire and wrath, if a decision was made on an elected official rather than an unaccountable staff. Would that be helpful?
Absolutely. I think that was our main concern, is that we ought to have an opportunity, if there is a change, to raise our concerns with the elected officials who have ultimately, we either vote you in or vote you out based on what you do. So yes, that's absolutely right.
I appreciate that. And having only participated in Yappy Hour a couple of times, every time I participated in, we've gone to Yappy Hour. We live on the west end of the island, so we tend to be on the beach with our dog more during the seasonal off-leash area. Although yesterday morning we walked an entire 1.2 miles and back. But Yappy Hour has always been near the beach club. Is that correct?
Yes, with one exception. I will tell you that, for example, my wife and I walk our dog all the way down and all the way back. So we start at Yappy Hour, we socialize a bit, and then we're off and walking.
But Yappy Hour itself, even if the expanded area of off-leash, on-leash area were implemented for 4 months, that wouldn't affect Yappy Hour.
I think that's true, although I should defer to others who
Okay.
they walk.
Okay. Fair enough. And so you did raise an issue about, dog parks and ARB fences and talked about arbitrary and capricious. Have you ever raised this issue collectively with the ARB about fencing for the benefit of dogs and dog owners?
I haven't, I'll defer to others on it. I have not.
I would encourage a collective conversation with the ARB about fences in that regard to at least partially address that issue. And if the town or the community were to add an off-leash park somewhere.
We have a vote on this.
I'm just posing questions.
Beach is Kiawah. It's
Okay.
10 miles.
I'm just posing questions.
Go to a little dog park, like
Okay.
we live in suburbs.
Okay.
I'm sorry, because that's who we are, that's why we came here, which was very well described, thank you.
Thank you again very much, Brian, for your input. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, we do have a list of folks who signed in. And again, please come up to, in order, to the podium if you will care to make some public comments. First, we have Greg Little, followed by Lance Spencer, followed by Lisa Handy. So, Greg?
I thought it was signing into the meeting.
That's fine. No,
But, given the opportunity, and I have occasionally been to the Yappy Hour, and it is a lovely, lovely hour. But I live on the dirt road on the west part of the beach, and it takes almost as long to get to that Yappy Hour as it does to go to Johns Island Park, where there is a fenced-in area. And whoever pointed out there's a world of difference between a dog park and the beach, and there's no comparison. And what I'm actually here to suggest, in the spirit of compromise, is if we're talking about taking weeks off of one end, why are we not adding months at the other? Do we not let dogs on the beach in September or October, or frankly, even August? Why are we doing that? And I don't know what the answer is. And to have a suggestion, let's take 2 weeks, let's take 4 weeks off of one end, and I didn't hear a hint of saying, but let's make it fair. Let's add in the fall. Those birds aren't in the fall, right? Based on the presentation. Why can I not let my dogs? I have a Yappy morning it's coming up in a couple of weeks. The best group of people, the best group of dogs, and you get to watch them run, you get to watch them play together, and it is a wonderful atmosphere, and I just don't know why we don't consider that. Even if we gave you the 2 weeks there, why not give us a month, give us 2 months on the other end? That seems reasonable and fair to me.
thank you. Lance?
Thank you, Councilmember Kay, and thank you, Brian. You did a great job, and you reflect my wife's and my views as well. Just a couple anecdotal things, sampling of one, very unscientific. But to the question of the fences, I live in Inlet Cove. I don't see there ever being fences there. As far as the east side of the beach, we have a 2.5-year-old, very reactive German Shepherd that was rescued from a high-capacity shelter. It doesn't do well with other dogs. So we go to happy hour ourselves sometimes, but not with our dog. The eastern part of the dog area is very good for our dog, and imagine there's other dogs like that as well that probably need to be considered. The signage and the education, I think, is going to be very helpful. The signs that Beachwalker Park put up this year that was in the presentation, I thought were very eye-catching and conveyed the story that needs to be told. Had we been interviewed in the public survey, we'd have said we're very interested in protecting shorebirds and sea turtles as well. But we do have a dog, and we do believe that's part of the culture of Kiawah. A couple considerations. Very often when we're out on the beach, we're in both ends of the beach, East Beach where we take our dog to play, and then West Beach and Captain Sam's. We have never seen a dog in the dunes, sampling of one. Almost all the time we see people disturbing the birds. Yesterday was just another example. A woman and her son were out walking, trying to get great pictures. And we did talk to them, explained to them why that was a problem, and they were respectful after that. They just didn't know. If you're considering the signs, perhaps maybe a small sentence in Spanish as well. We ran into a family yesterday who had a dog that was close enough to the dunes that we commented to them. They didn't speak English. So that might be helpful as well to consider the public population that goes to the west side of the beach. We did see the wildlife truck out yesterday as well. So we know you guys were out there on a Sunday, so appreciate that. So those are just my observations and thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Lance. Okay, we have Lisa Handy.
I am a veterinarian. So you got one. So I have actually prepared over the last probably 2 weeks just some things to discuss. I think Brian, you did an unbelievable job, as Ann has as well, and has actually cut mine much shorter, so that will save some time. I do want to say I've been a veterinarian for 40 years. I have dedicated my entire career to the care and well-being of our animals. I've dealt with DNR a lot over my career. It's a great organization. What you do for us here is why I am here. I think the biggest thing that I would say, two things. Brian, you talked a little bit about emotional aspect of our dog socializing. People also, it's very important for us to socialize. I think the majority of people here are 60 and over. We've all dealt with the loss of spouses, siblings, family members, pets, etc. It's very important our dogs give us that emotional support. I've read all of our papers that have been listed. I also have published scientific papers as well. My biggest complaint, and Brian would have said this as well, is the fact that there is no documentation of our dogs along the coast causing an issue in that particular area. I also walk all the way down. I run with my big hairy dog up and down. I'm sure a lot of people have seen her. She's 9 years old. I'm getting ready to retire full-time here. I can't wait to be on the beach full-time with her. Our dogs are under control. The most disturbances I've seen, as probably the other dog walkers have seen, are turtle eggs dug up from the coyotes. Deer tracks. This morning I saw deer tracks. I will also say I was thrilled to see 2 bobcats this morning when I came up. I love this island. I love my dog. I enjoy my beach walker friends. And I hope that you will really consider the fact that we are very responsible. Our birds are also very smart. They know where to go. And of course, they're coming to Kiawah. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay, next we have Diane Gillius, and then,
Just say thank you to Brian and Lisa, you've said everything I would say.
and Kathy Bell, and then
Ditto.
Ditto, okay, is it Rebecca? Stinson? Okay, and Susan Thomas, then Bethany.
We thought we were just signing in.
You got, this is not a problem. If everybody spoke, we'd be here a long time. So Bonnie and Jerry?
No, we thought we were just signing in.
John McGowan. Ann's husband?
Yes, I'm Ann's husband. I just want to thank all of you for all the cooperation and work that you all have done to get us to this point, and really appreciates all the support from all of you. She just wants to say thank you to everyone, the staff, the council members, mayor, and sorry, just regret that she couldn't be here. She had to be with her mother. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Next, Rav and Jeff Mulady, and then,
Hey, good morning. I'm part of the West End group also. Brian, great job. John, compliment your wife, Ann. I've been out.
I'm sorry, sir. For the record, are you Jeff?
Jeff.
Okay, thank you.
And Aaron, you do a fantastic job. Jim, I hope you're aware of that. I've been out witnessing Aaron at work doing a lot of the data on the migration of birds. I wish there would have been a little background information DNR presented on these birds come here because of the food source. There wasn't any mention of that. We've had a lot of decline in the food source population. I'm sure most of you have read about it. The horseshoe crab decline and all that. I wish you would have spent a few minutes giving people a background on that. As far as what Greg said, same thing. I think most of us would love some more time on the back end. I do informal data. I walk the beach with Paula at least 4 times a week, and that's year round. And I have yet to see a dog digging up any bird's nests or turtle egg nests or anything. Coyotes are the big problem. Raccoons are the big problem. Aaron knows that. It's not that. The second biggest problem is probably the family with young children and bikes trying to get their best Instagram photo. Please ride your bike through the bird flocks. There's so much of that goes on. That is 10x the problem of a dog. And I think try to embrace the dog owners. We would be the best stewards of policing that. The people that walk the beach are the ones that know what's going on, and we tend to do it consistently. That's why we're here. So I would really try to embrace it. Don't try to police it. That's all my opinion.
Thank you. Okay, then we have Gay. Well, I knew her, so
I just wanted to say over 20 years of property ownership and living here at Kiawah, I have never seen dogs go up into the dunes either. I'm a dog owner, lover, my whole life. I have a dog currently, older girl. What I have seen is people causing problems. I don't think the dogs are the problem. I think it's people that are the problem. And I think this group can self-govern and be the best stewards for the whole island to tell tourists or residents or guests who aren't controlling their dogs to stop and control your dog. More ordinances, I don't think will fix any of the problems that we have regarding bird nest or turtle nest or critical habitats, whatever they might be for other animals as well. I think people need to take responsibility and act as stewards, particularly the full-time residents here, that includes me, to act as stewards to inform people that they see on the beach that aren't paying attention to their dog or their children. I've seen people get those photos. I ran out of a meeting at the sandcastle. Said, sorry, got up, ran out because there was a woman on the beach right in front of the sandcastle with her daughter trying to get an Instagram photo of her daughter running through a flock of probably hundreds of red knots. I've seen stuff like that too often, so I'd like to see the area stay as is and let this group of really responsible, well-intentioned people that we can call the Kiawah groups be the regulators. Let's see how it goes. I get concerned about other wildlife, particularly bobcats in the past. Also, I'm a bird lover. I've got birding books, bird artwork all over my house, binoculars, the whole thing. I just don't think that this proposal will achieve what you're trying to achieve. I think there's probably another way to do it, and all this input is great. Ann should run for town council, Brad. We could use some.
We'll try to put her to work somehow, some way. John may say, really? No?
Also, we had, for years, all these fireworks on the beach for weddings and stuff. And once I got down here full time, I noticed like almost every weekend, all these fireworks going off down by the ocean course at the conclusion of weddings. And so we, prevailed upon the town to work with the resort to disallow that. And that has taken place. So no more fireworks every weekend, because that has got to be horrible for birds, nesting birds, any birds, other wildlife as well. So that was a good accomplishment to protect the shore for our wildlife. So I'd like to see more concentration on things like that. I watched yesterday and last Sunday the beach patrol and the guy who puts the umbrellas and the chairs out at higher tide, not absolute high tide, but driving along in the loose sand because the water had come up so high. More and more high tides, more and more sea level rise. So any trucks or vehicles on the beach are getting pushed up into the edge of the dunes. And that to me is a bigger problem than dogs potentially getting up into the dunes. Maybe the resort could make the ocean course out of bounds line, run the whole length of the top of the dunes, and if you hit your ball over that line, you don't get to go down in the dunes. I've seen that happen many times. Looking for your golf ball, it could be out of bounds, or you get a free drop or something. That's one thing to think about as well. But I've also seen younger people than me, much younger than me, partying in the dunes with, adult beverages and litter and stuff like that. So I think those are the things we need to focus on. I don't think another ordinance is necessarily going to achieve what you want. Ordinances are only as good as their enforcement. Also, we don't have any land for a dog park. A fenced-in dog park is not a good idea for Kiawah. If you want a dog park, go over to the well or River Road is my suggestion. So thank you for your
Thank you, Gay. Lynn Hausfeld and Daryl Johnson and Don James, Gwen Emery.
I just want to make a couple statements. This has been very beneficial.
Ma'am, if you can speak at the podium because we're live streaming. Thank you.
Neil, is there anything you can do with the volume of that
They
mic?
just need to speak closer to the mic. They're standing too far away from it.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate this. It's been very educational. I think a couple things came up that really struck me is I agree with the signage and broadening what it says to include other languages because we do get a broader number of people visiting our island now. I think that's really important. I also agree with, I forgot your name, that with the psychological benefits to people. I know that for me, every day I go to the beach is a good day. So not only does my dog benefit, but I benefit. And I would not benefit as much if I went to a dog park. I did some research about the red knots, and I do think we need to be guardians of our birds. The Chesapeake Bay really embraced that in terms of the feeding and decreasing the harvesting of horseshoe crabs, which greatly benefited the red knots. So looking at the other issues that affect our shorebirds, I think are really important. And finally, the sliver of the dog park we're talking about is surrounded by a golf course, beach umbrellas, people who park themselves and spend hours with kids running back and forth. So I think we have to think of more than just a sliver where a dog is under control with their owner or running the beach and really not necessarily, well, I've never seen a dog go into the dunes. So I appreciate people considering everything that goes into that sliver.
Thank you. So I just want to address a couple of points that have come up because you just mentioned signage again. And again, largely as a result of the audit that Anne conducted last summer, the subcommittee immediately went about tackling the whole signage issue, and the town communication department has now come up with new signage that'll go on the trash bins that will be changed according to the seasonality, whether it would be a turtle education sign or a shorebird education sign. It'll also review some rules of engagement for the beach. We had not thought about a second language, so that's a great suggestion. And we would look for your feedback as to how the new signage is working and whether you think it can be improved, modified, whatever, over the coming months once we get this going. So there have been steps taken. You also, several folks have mentioned the issue with golfers. Met with Roger Warren at the resort several months ago. He agreed to increase signage on the golf course to keep those dunes off limit. I know that there are still violations of that, but I did check with Sarah a week or two ago. Signs have gone up. So it should be somewhat improved, the situation. Again, since you guys are there all the time, it would be really helpful for you to help us continue to monitor that, and the resort's been extremely cooperative in working with us, and I'm sure they will continue to be so. Okay, next is Sandy Devine. Sandy, are you here? Okay. Sue Wallahan. Attendee. Dwight Williams?
I'll be brief. Dwight Williams, 95 Wax Myrtle. On behalf of Dwight Williams, 95 Wax Myrtle.
Can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? I don't know
Better?
what else I can do. I'll shout. I'll be very brief because I think everything's been said and quite more eloquently than I can say it. But, I don't think anybody here is of the belief that wildlife isn't threatened. I think most of us moved here because of our appreciation, at least in part, of wildlife. So that's not the question here. I think what we can look at is why is the wildlife in decline, and there's a lot of reasons. It can be climate related, it can be the loss of habitat, it can be avian flu. There are just a number of things that are critical, wreaking havoc on shorebird population and others. But I think two of the salient points I want to make is, first, most importantly, I believe we have ordinances against being in the dunes, against uncontrolled dogs. We have them now. We're not supposed to be in the dunes. I don't see it, but if we are, give me a ticket. Let's enforce the rules that we have as opposed to creating additional rules on top of regulations that are here in place and made to help protect the habitat. That's first. Secondly, just a little bit about the research. Now, we saw, I don't know, something about 25, 30 years ago, someone walked through a field of a nesting area with dogs on a leash and unleashed, and they determined that that was detrimental to the nesting area. Well, I'm not shocked. I think that's probably what most researchers would find out. What we don't know is, what is the impact here in Kiawah? What's the impact of, I've been researching this a little bit myself, but what's the impact of snakes on the bird population? Apparently it's incredible, and I see a lot of snakes in the dunes. What is the impact of coyotes? What are the impacts of raccoons, deer, golfers, bobcats? I've even seen a couple alligators in the dunes. So the reality is we have a lot of things that can be impacting nesting areas if there is an adverse impact, but we have to look at what it is on Kiawah, not in South America or in the Arctic. It's here on Kiawah. And right now, we really haven't seen that. And like I said, I think the dog owners that I see on a daily basis, and I am on that beach almost every single day, are very respectful of our wildlife. And that's it. So.
And again, just to clarify, this is not a new ordinance. These are revisions to an existing ordinance. Okay. Okay, Janice Walpole, then Steve Lamb, then Carol Medendorf. Oh, you don't?
But I will say one thing. The path that was shown, maybe DNR showed the slide with the birds going way north and way south, and Kiawah is in the middle. We could protect our whole 10 miles, but with what's happening above us and below us, what they're allowing or what's happening, we may never get the 8,000 birds, red knots, back on Kiawah. I don't know what's happening above us and below us. There may be things that are making the birds decrease in numbers, and they're not going to be 8,000 here. So that's, further research as to what is happening north of us and south of us, what's happening to their populations. Are they at 8,000 and they get to Kiawah and they're dropping dramatically, or are there not 8,000 coming to us?
Thank you. Steve? Okay, Carol Medendorf?
Carol Medendorf, Parkside. Most has been said. One of the things is the enforcement. We didn't hear a whole lot on enforcement. You said these rules have been here a while. Have there been any tickets or fines or, enforcement, I think, across Kiawah is needed. I agree with the gentleman talking about making it October 1st or whatever. Seabrook does start on October 1st, so that, there could be a reason that they're doing that. And then the other thing would be the coyote research. I know I do turtles and they've gotten to the nests. Has there been any studies on the coyotes, specifically with the birds, but also just the increase of coyotes? Maybe that's an issue that needs to be looked at and maybe some taken away. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol. Okay, then we've got Lee Cobb and then Gay Stathis again. Lee?
I too thought I was just signing in.
Okay, no. Since,
I have one thing to add. Let me go back. Right now at the Kiawah Island Beach Club, there are plans going forward to build a, call it a guard station, so that they can cut down on people accessing the Kiawah Island Beach Club that aren't members. So that will stop people who aren't members from using that parking lot with that new boardwalk to take their dogs down onto the beach. So how do they get down onto the beach where the off-leash area is? They'll go park sometimes down at Ocean Course, and they can access that area from Ocean Course for the public who are not Kiawah Island Club members. If you reduce the footprint, you're going to really penalize the non-club members' access to the off-beach area. So you need to think about that if it's not already off the table. So I forgot to mention that earlier. That's all.
thank you.
And if I could just follow up on that, because someone.
If you can state your name for the record, please.
Greg Little, 13 Eugenia. Again, at that part of the beach. If it becomes club only, then that's going to wipe out such a large, at least from my perspective, it's going to wipe me out from being able to go to the happy hour. And I still don't understand. My understanding is Seabrook allows year-round before 10 o'clock and after 5 o'clock on the beach. I may be wrong about that, but I think that's correct. Why don't we do that? It's a very simple, it seems to me, solution to a lot of the then, frankly, you can put up all the guard things you want in front of the club. But if you leave the beach open for us, and it's hard to put into words the joy that watching dogs play together on the beach can give you. I mean, it makes me healthier. I think it makes the people around us healthier, and it definitely makes the dog healthier. And I just really wish there would be an attempt to look at how we could be even more dog-friendly. I think it would make it a better place. Thank you.
Thank you. Cindy McKinley? Did-
Hear me? Yes? Hey. So I am Cindy McKinley. I am a shorebird steward.
Pick up your mic, please. Just grab it off.
Right there.
Just take it off.
Oh,
There you go.
got it? I feel special now. I am a shorebird steward. I wrote a nice little speech that I might give, but I've changed a lot of what I was going to say after listening to all of you guys. I understand your frustrations. I understand what it is you want. I want to clarify a few things for you. First of all, red knots do not nest here. Red knots are migrating through here. What happens below us and above us is kind of not even an issue right now because they're coming, some of them are coming from the southern tip of South America, stop once in South America, and then fly all the way to here. By the time they get here, they're emaciated, they're really tired. I think some of the reasons they're not going somewhere south of us is because of all the people here in those places. Kiawah is a special place. We know that. That's why we're here. Kiawah has spent decades trying to keep this a natural environment. That's why we're here. That's why the red knots are here. We have the highest concentration of coquina clams, I believe, if anywhere on the East Coast. That's why they're here. They love horseshoe crab eggs. We've got some issues going on around us with horseshoe crab eggs. DeVoe Bank is an awesome place for horseshoe crab eggs. At some point during their stay, one of them is going to be like, hey guys, there's ice cream over at DeVoe. They're going to fly over to DeVoe, and then they're going to come back here again to rest. So it is really important that people don't chase those birds, that they don't run into the flocks, which I used to do before I became a shorebird steward because I didn't understand why. And I think as a shorebird steward, it's important for us to educate the public why we have these rules, why we have these suggestions. And I think it's awesome that you guys are also wanting to protect the birds and that you are out there telling people, please don't do this. It's not helpful for the birds. Another thing I wanted to clarify, the nesting birds. So right now we're talking about the East End. We aren't necessarily talking about the West End. On the East End, there was a survey that showed that there were 16 nests within what is currently the critical area. If I'm correct, in the last few years, almost all of those nests have been lost. Is that correct? To high tides wash over some of them?
It's hard to tell.
That whole area keeps changing. And so the critical area that is there is soon going to be ocean. So the birds are just looking for high ground. They're looking for a place to nest. So the critical area is moving its way east and west of the ocean course. It's slowly going to move. And I know it's easy for us to be Google experts. These guys have spent careers studying this stuff, and they are saying, we don't want to take away from you, and we don't want to take away from your dogs. But we do want to help these birds who really don't have a leg up. There are so many places that are crushing them. Yes, there are coyotes in the dunes. Yes, there are golfers that are going in the dunes. They're not supposed to. They're supposed to get a free job. There are fishermen going in the dunes. But if we can do one little thing to help, just one more little thing to help these birds, I think that a lot of you, and yes, there was only one nest west. Partly, I think, because, and I know you don't want to hear it, but there are dogs walking nearby. Aaron showed a graph there that I want to point out again because it's something that we talk about a lot. A person can get quite close to a bird without disturbing it. A person can get quite close to a nest, and the mother is going to fly from the nest. Those birds can cook within minutes. The eggs, the chicks, they can all die. But a dog, when that bird sees a dog from far away, they might fly away. So just keep that in mind when you're talking about your dog. This isn't just about dogs going into the dunes. It isn't about dogs digging up nests. That is an issue on other parts of the island. I'm gonna give you the benefit of the doubt and say that your dogs are probably the best behaved dogs on the island. And it may very well be true because you guys care. On other parts of the island, especially where there are a lot of visitors, and I spend most of my time walking the West Beach area, there's a lot of visitors. They don't know the rules and they just don't care. So I'm gonna say that your dogs are great and they don't run into the dunes because you do care, because you guys are stewarding your home. But keep in mind that even when your dog is not running into the dunes and not chasing the birds, just the fact that that dog is there is one more thing that's deterring those birds from being able to nest. So they're losing the area that they were in. They might try several times in the season, and then they move down, and then they see dogs, and they fly off. So that is something to consider. I think a lot of your worries are the slippery slope, that you're worried that if they can do this today, what's to stop them from doing this tomorrow, and we're gonna lose our space. And I think that that's a concern that people have in a lot of issues that come up, and it's probably something that needs to be addressed to make sure that this is something that it's being done for a important reason. I know that Lisa handy, emailed Melissa Hughes at College of Charleston and Nolan Schillerstrom. Both of them sent her I got copies of their emails. We do have access to a lot of information of studies that have happened on Kiawah, on Seabrook, on the East Coast that we can share with people. And I would like to invite anyone on the Environmental Committee, Town Council, anyone here to come on a walk with us, and we can sort of walk and talk about the birds that are on our beaches. We don't have red knots here right now. We don't have nesting birds here right now. But it would be nice for you to kind of see that. Well, but you do have dogs in October. Okay, well, that's a whole different, I'm not going to talk about the rest of the beach. I'm just talking about the proposed ordinance right now. So yes, that's.
Also suggests, or says, you're taking 2 weeks.
Yes.
So would you
That's for well, no, but that's because we have birds migrating through right now, and we have like the Great Plains piping plover, which is an endangered bird. We do have other birds migrating through, and so that is an important. There's lots, yes, yes. Anyway, yeah, but I just want to really quickly throw out one other thing. The studies, I already mentioned that. See, I had this beautiful, beautiful thing to read to you guys. Oh, my big one right here is Kiawah touts their dolphins, their alligators, their bobcats, and the sea turtles. And I think everybody loves them and everybody wants to take care of them. There are very few people who seem to really take time to learn about our shorebirds. And it seems like you guys are passionate, and I really do encourage you to learn more about the shorebirds, and hopefully we can find something that works for everyone. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, next we have Frances Boyd. If you just hand it to Frances, please. Thank you.
It's on Francis.
Thanks. I'm Frances Boyd. I live at 4988 Green Dolphin Way, and I am a dog person, but I don't belong to that special group because my dog is 16 years old, and the last time I took her down there, she couldn't get out of bed all the next day. So, but I've had a dog since I was a year old. I'm 76. There were 3 years when I lived in an apartment, couldn't have a dog. I have dog faces on mugs, playing cards. I love dogs. And my current dog, as I said, is 16. And I love her, but I know I'm not going to have forever with her. I'm also a shorebird steward, and I'm so proud to be a shorebird steward. I also helped Aaron band the painted buntings. I was a bluebird patrol person. And, you know, if Aaron said that there was a need to do something, I wouldn't hesitate to do it. I don't know why people are suspicious of him. It's just really, really beyond my comprehension. So I don't know what else to say about that. But I love the fact that I live in a place where if I get another younger dog, I can let it run on the beach. I feel very lucky and very happy about that. But the fact that I live in a place that protects wildlife and has a special program for shorebirds, really, I'm in awe about that. I'm honored about that. So when you go to ask me to decide, there have been compromises, a lot of compromises. And my dogs have never known, they've never kept a calendar, they've never known if they have missed a couple of weeks on the beach or if they can only run for a little bit less than they've been running. They don't know that. So I guess it's the dog people we're mainly talking about. And so I go for shorebirds. I go for whatever protections are needed because you're not harming the dogs. But if a random dog goes into the dunes, not your dog, but somebody else's, then we could wipe out several clutches of shorebirds, and they're federally protected. So I'm really at a loss to say more. I won't say more, but I'm at a loss to see why this has stirred up such a controversy. And I just urge you to, instead of letting it go a season with no changes, why don't you let it go a season with the changes they have proposed? Let it go that way. Try that for a while. I mean, what's the difference? You want to go a season with no other limitations.
Okay, hold on, folks.
I thought
Please
I
let
was
her speak.
speaking. I'm sorry.
Francis has got the microphone.
You want to ask me a question? It was rhetorical.
And I'm trying to answer.
Okay.
And I object to your suggestion.
You what?
I object to the suggestion that we change the ordinances. And I think that's why all of us are here. So what I was suggesting is, if there's anybody else who objects to that suggestion, that we.
Then you'll have an opportunity to speak when Francis is done.
Yeah, but I was just answering the question.
A rhetorical question.
Okay, I don't have data, but these guys do. And I think that honestly, it's a small cadre of dog people. I am a dog person, but I'm not in the little group. And I suggest you go a season with them. I mean, that's all I'm saying. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis. Okay, we've got next Anne Moriarty. I believe.
Hello, I'm Anne Moriarty. I live at 48 Surf Song. I've been coming to Kiawah for 42 years, and I have been a property owner for 35, and I'm a permanent resident as of 2019. I am also a shorebird steward, but a lifelong dog lover. I've had dogs my whole life until my last dog died at the age of 20. I got to change the carpets, and then I moved to Kiawah. A couple comments here. I'm sure that all of you are responsible dog owners, that your dogs are always under control, that your dogs do not chase or go into the dunes. I'm sure of that. One of the problems that we have is that we are not talking about dogs or shorebirds. We are talking about human beings. Just a little couple historical facts. They are known. Humans have actively cohabitated with dogs for 15,000 to 30,000 years, 30,000 years. And they have bred dogs actively. They have genetically modified dogs. They have bred dogs to take advantage of the instinctual traits of those dogs. We've got hunters, we've got ratters, we've got we have dogs that protect Asian princes that have been bred for security. We have dogs that are wonderful for everything that we need them to do. And they were bred predominantly to do work. Now, as everyone knows, over time, dogs have become our companions, and we love our dogs, and they love us, and they give us a lot of comfort. But their instincts still prevail, regardless of the breeding. In fact, their instincts prevail and are accentuated because of the breeding. Now, not all dogs are fortunate enough to have good owners. And as most of us know, to train a dog well, it takes lots of dog treats and lots of time with your dog. Not everybody does that. You guys aren't the people I worry about with your dogs. I don't. But I can tell you, as a shorebird steward, I have witnessed dogs in the no-dog zone. I have watched people throw their balls into the no-dog area. I have seen people throw their dogs into flocks of birds, letting the dog chase the balls into the birds. I am not making this up. I have been cursed at. I have been told, my dog doesn't chase birds. My dog doesn't bother birds. My dog wouldn't go near a bird. Well, let's talk about the birds now. Birds, red knots specifically, because they're our most endangered, well, they're the ones of most concern for this group. But they arose from modern day birds about 65 million years ago. They have never been domesticated. They have never been habituated. They don't know anything about humans, but they do know that furry, four-footed creatures are their predators. This is an instinct. They're hardwired. Birds' brains are not like human brains. Bird brains have migratory patterns that they're born with, and they have evolved in concert with their food dependence. So the fact that they make a trip from the southern tip of South America and stop here is because the food sources are available here and have been available here for thousands of years. They then fatten up, double their body weight, get these beautiful red feathers, and then they fly nonstop to the Arctic Circle. That is a long way for a bird to go. But part of their migratory patterns also are associated with predator awareness. Anything they don't really know about, like helicopters, bicycles, fireworks, all of that is a threat. And they flee disturbances because that's how they keep themselves safe. If they flee, they are using up energy that they need to make it to their breeding zone so they can successfully nest. So we're talking about a pretty amazing bird. And I know everyone says they love to see their dogs playing in the surf and off the leash. But when you think about the magic of a red knot flying 20,000 miles round trip, it's pretty amazing. Now, let me talk about humans. Dogs are not humans. Birds are not humans. Our dogs rely upon us for their survival. Birds rely on their instincts. So we cannot manage the red knots, but we can manage our dogs. I think that both dog owners and lovers and people who are committed to the natural beauty of Kiawah should work together to ensure that endangered shorebirds survive. I think the new ordinance is not onerous. I think it is a very good compromise. I think we need to band together to educate other dog owners and to notify someone of people who are violating those ordinances, because I think enforcement is a big issue. I think we should band together for design of effective signage, which I applaud you for. And I think that we need to have a kind of a serious discussion about enforcement, because I think that's where we fall down. And it's hard to enforce something on 11 miles of beach when the birds are flying away and the dogs are running back to their owners. So just my comments, but I think we need to act now, because if we don't, we are going to see a further decrease in shorebird survival on the planet.
Thank you, Ann. Next, we've got Brian Amory.
Hi, I'm Brian Amory. I live at 33 Salt Cedar. Try to keep this brief. Firstly, it seems to me you're trying to take rights away from the existing property owners here who like to use the beach for their dogs. I would just say to you that, from my perspective, the burden of proof is on you to present a compelling case to change what we are and eliminate or alter the rights that we currently have. What I've heard here, we talked a lot about data. There's a lot of surmise, a lot of conjecture, but not a lot of facts. If you do even a minimal amount of research online, you'll see there's a lot of other views on red knots, where they feed, what the problem is. Chesapeake Bay being mentioned as their primary feeding ground, and the problems with the harvesting of the horseshoe crabs there. So I submit to you, I've read everything that was presented with the, I think it was studies 1 through 3 and another paper from Australia. Not compelling at all, not compelling data to change the current situation. We keep on asking, where are the incidents of dogs creating a problem? There aren't any. That's the response. There aren't any. So why change something, excuse me, why change something where there really isn't a problem? As I always say, trying to solve for a problem that doesn't exist. There's no problem here. The owners do an unbelievable job of policing their dogs. The dogs are not creating a problem. Environmental change, creating a problem? Sure. You can see from the slides that have been up there, things change over time on the shore area, affect the nesting area. Red knots have been suggested as being one of the principal examples here of why we need to make change. If the red knots can fly 18,000 miles every year, seems to me they can figure out, if their habitat changes a bit, how to adapt to that. The idea that the dogs are being vilified here as creating some kind of decline in the red knot population is preposterous. There is no support for that. So I submit to you, if you want to change, the burden's on you. Give us some data. You have not given us any data.
Thank you. Jennifer Jerome? Okay, somebody speaking on behalf of Pamela Cohen?
Hey, so Pamela Cohen, who is on the pet restraint subcommittee, is in Italy right now, and she just found out this morning that she could have a surrogate. So I am going to read the letter. I've edited it down just a little bit for time. So this is the letter that she wrote. I call on everyone to embrace the reality that the proposed pet ordinance is essential to help the naturally given gifts that are struggling to survive on our local beach. The ecosystem here on Kiawah is a delicate and fragile entity which could easily be upended if proper care is not instituted. My position is strong and adamant for preservation. I speak as a biologist, a professional wildlife photographer, a former trustee of the Kiawah Conservancy, a town of Kiawah shorebird steward, and most recently, a member of the Pet Ordinance Subcommittee. Being a property owner for 37 years, I have seen the transition and evolution of our island that is certainly not making a movement toward the positive. Years ago, I witnessed incredible encounters as I photographed from afar my favorite species, the American oyster catcher. For months, I watched in amazement as the parents went through their life cycle, feeding, teaching, and raising their chicks at the Ocean Course Beach. This area is not far from where dogs, many that are hunting dogs, run loose. The experience was documented in photographs and memories 16 years ago, yet it is one that ultimately changed my life and enhanced my love for shorebirds. If more people had experiences such as this, perhaps they would not be building homes here for the purpose to walk their dogs on open beach. Perhaps they would desire to live here because the habitat is incredibly unique and conducive to many amazing wildlife species. Maybe they could enjoy and possibly have the interaction with nature that would be forever imprinted into their memories as well. To view a spectacular flock of thousands of federally threatened red knots voraciously feeding along the tide lines to ensure their survival raises questions as to why we would do anything to threaten such wonders of nature. Surely, with my background in science, I have read the countless journal entries packed with data supporting the fact that dogs are detrimental to shorebirds along coastal habitats. You are no doubt aware that these studies have been collected on nearby islands. As a shorebird steward, I have encountered a varied amount of incidents with people and their dogs on the beach. I nearly was bitten by a large dog that came charging at me until its owner who was on a mobile phone, realized that her large pet was running full throttle in my direction, and it wasn't for petting. These situations are prevalent, although I must add, I do find that some residents on Kiawah are to be mindful once I educate them about the birds, their activities, and point out suitable nesting habitats. I am fond of dogs and own one for many years. However, restrictions need to be in place and enforced. Kiawah's rules do not safeguard our beloved habitat and wildlife. I feel the proposed ordinance is still too lenient. It is just plain common sense that dogs are detrimental to shorebirds. No additional extensive studies, which are costly and could take years, are needed to prove this point. Now we are forced to balance the scale of dogs and shorebirds. I choose having a magnificent rare habitat over a dog park on the ocean. Respectfully, Pamela Cohen. And I will say also that most of our shorebird stewards steward in the spring and summer, and so a lot of them are not in town right now. So they will probably be sending letters and doing online comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, we've got Becky Grants. And we've got Satch. And we've got John and Adrian McAvoy. And Brian, we had Allison Frey.
Good morning, thank you. I wasn't going to speak. I guess I just would like to clarify, we are just looking at taking away 2 weeks of dogs off leash in February. We're just looking for 2 weeks to protect shorebirds. So it's 2 weeks, we're talking about today, we're talking about 2 weeks. And then we are talking at the east coast of the beach, just shortening a section for just 4 months at the max. We're not taking it away, we're just shortening it for a little bit of time with the knowledge that if birds are not nesting there, it will go back to its regular area. That's what we're talking about. Thank you. Oh, and I think October 31st is for sea turtles. October 31st, that's sea turtle season. But for the dogs are until October 31st, because that is the state's sea turtle nesting season.
Okay, thank you, Allison. David Day, KT Gallo, Judy Nichols, Denise Klezak, Joan, oh, who did I miss? Denise.
I've listened to,
It's on.
hello?
That's it.
I've listened to everyone's, and I wish we lived in a perfect world. We don't. Dogs, people, and birds will have to get along with compromises on both sides. I extend my greatest wish to you that you hold this ordinance off and its changes until the proper data can come in, the public can be more informed. And I'd also like to ask you, if you move to this island, and I'm a permanent resident since 2019, and I've been coming for 30-some years, it has changed. But not all changes are good. We have things happening on our beach that were not supposed to happen. We have trucks, we have more tourists, which we promote. The residents live here because of what it is, and we do not support the residents all the time in the fact that some of our older people, I'm looking here, a lot of gray hair, no hair. Our children are gone, our dogs are our companions, and it is a great social aspect for someone who's walking a dog. There isn't a morning I don't walk my dog on the beach, on leash at this time, where someone doesn't stop and speak to me. It could be a tourist, an out-of-towner, it could be a local. To me, that's a great part of our island. And to watch a dog run through a wave, there isn't anything better. So please consider holding off, waiting till we have the facts, and maybe including more people who are not professional bird stewards, but maybe professional dog owners who would like to be on your committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Joan?
I'm Joan Hograve. I live at 77 Peppervine, and that's in Inlet Cove, and that's on the west side of the island. And I realize, as was pointed out, that you do the west side of the island, and there are a lot of violations there. And a lot of that could be due to Beachwalker Park and the visitors from Beachwalker Park who don't follow the rules of the island. And so my main thing, there's 2 points I want to make, but the main point is there's a lack of enforcement, especially at that part of the island with what's going on regarding dogs and being on leash and not going beyond the point of dogs being allowed beyond a point. So that's one thing, and hopefully the signage will help. I don't know, but there needs to be a lot more enforcement across the whole beach area. And the other point I'm going to make is there a possibility that we have a period of time, like maybe 7 to 9 in the morning, where we can walk our dogs off leash, that there aren't a lot of people there? That's a possibility to consider. I too think we need a lot more data to support these changes regarding what you're suggesting for our dogs. And I realize that we're saying as dog owners, we do follow the rules, but let's make it a point of realizing who are the people that are not following the rules, and pay attention to that. And I like to have a study done to determine what's going on here on the island before you start singling out that we need to change things. And I realize you're saying it's only 2 weeks, but I gotta tell you, my little Guido has been waiting patiently, and he's a Jack Russell, and I'm telling you, he's not really patient. So that's all I
Thank
have to
you.
say.
Okay, we're to Allison Lang. How about Susan Woolen?
I'm Susan Woolen. I'm a retired veterinarian. I am a South Carolina native. One of the reasons we bought our house at Kiawah is because there is an off-leash dog area 365 days a year. I think people that I see down there are very respectful and very grateful to have the area where the dogs are able to go on the beach. We have 10 miles of gorgeous beach. We are lucky enough to have Bird Key between us and Folly, lucky enough to have DeVos Bank between Seabrook and Edisto as solely dedicated areas for birds. I'm a huge bird lover. I think that there's valid reasons to worry about their populations. I think we can come up with a compromise. But I think it's crucial to have an area for our dogs to exercise. I am one who is denied a fence in my yard by the ARB. I can't let my dogs go in my own backyard. They have nowhere to go off leash. I think that is very important for the dogs and for their owners. So I appreciate everybody's work, and I hope we can maintain an area where our dogs have free access to exercise. Thank you.
Thank you. Then someone with handwriting that's worse than mine, which is hard. Gary?
97 Bass Creek Lane.
Nancy Curran? Brooke Boser?
Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me today? Wonderful. I have hearing loss, so I appreciate all y'all speaking up. My name is Brooke Blosser. I'm the Land, Water, and Wildlife Project Manager with the Coastal Conservation League located at 131 Spring Street. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comment on the beach pet restraint ordinance. I am encouraging the town and its residents to adopt an ordinance that reduces the beach off-leash area during the months of April, May, and June. One thing I want to highlight is we are only reducing the area and not taking the area away entirely. The town of Kiawah Island is very clear to me, prioritizes its community, that of both its residents and its wildlife. Today's discussion about the beach pet restraint ordinance is a chance for the community of residents to show their support for the ecological inhabitants of the island. The Kiawah and Seabrook Island complex is a critical and unique shorebird habitat in coastal South Carolina. Here, shorebirds stop to rest for their annual migration, and others may choose to roost in the dunes and raise their young. Although these birds have been using the island complex for generations, recent hurricanes and winter storms have significantly eroded nearby beaches, including that of DeVoe Bank, and impacted the birds' ability to rest and roost safely. Roofer redknots, as we've heard, piping plovers, Wilson's plovers, American oystercatcher, my personal favorite, and least terns are all species of special conservation concern here in South Carolina and are found on the amazing beaches of Kiawah. These birds are facing threats from a warming climate and significant habitat loss worldwide. Scientific studies have examined the impact of free-roaming pets on bird behavior, and they all repeat the same sentiment. Free-roaming pets are perceived as predators. When shorebirds react to a predator, real or perceived, it can deplete their energy stores and impact their ability to raise young and journey far distances. Keeping the threats to these birds to a minimum by reducing the area, not taking it away, reducing the area for free-roaming pets is one measure to ensure that beachgoers, including those with dogs, can enjoy the bird species for generations to come. Knowing how threatened these shorebird populations are, the prospect of even a potential disturbance could be dire for bird populations. Free-roaming pets and their humans and the birds don't act differently on Kiawah Island than they do on any other beach in the world. Moving forward, an ordinance that allows for both responsible pet recreation while protecting critical shorebird habitat is critical for protecting those shorebirds. It is also of note that among Charleston County beaches, Kiawah Island has the loosest restrictions on free-roaming pets, meaning that every other Charleston County resident, myself included, is subject to distancing themselves from shorebirds during their critical life cycle periods, except the residents of Kiawah Island, which is the single most important bird habitat in the entirety of Charleston County. Kiawah Island is a spot of hope. Here, significant numbers of roofer redknots stop by on annual migrations, and the Wilson's plover nests are, while though not successful, are a sign of hope. This ordinance is an excellent opportunity for the town of Kiawah Island to show the world that human and wildlife residents can live harmoniously. The island community should welcome the birds as members of its ecological community and should adopt a pet ordinance that will allow for safe habitats from encroaching humans and their pets only during critical times of the bird life cycle. We support an ordinance that reduces the length of an off-leash dog area during the critical months of April, May, and June, with the encouragement of March as an additional seasonal closure to account for redknots. Thank you.
Thank you, Brooke. Charlotte Stanton. That's quite, you. Please, come on up and speak.
I'll start out with a comment. It's another 2 weeks. So every 5, 10 years, we keep shortening it, shortening it. We start designating more and more areas as critical habitat. And let's take this off. The critical habitat. And so where we can let our dogs run gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So it's not just, it's another. My name is Marty Stanton, 387 Snowy Egret. My wife and I, Charlotte, have been property owners here for 20 years and retired down here, moved full-time 3 years ago, and specifically moved here and retired here because we have the ability to let our dog run freely on the beach. We didn't get another dog until we retired down here. We have a 20-pound cockapoo named Maggie, who is probably the most athletic dog I have ever owned in my life. This dog runs 30 miles an hour and chases balls from one end of the beach to the other end of the beach. So yeah, she uses that entire space that we're talking about here on the off-leash area. One end to the other and back. Then she's finally tired enough that she'll sleep. And we have a restful evening. So that's one of the reasons I moved down here. I'm not a golfer. I didn't move down here because of the amenities on the island. I came down here for the beach and that I could run the dog. So having been here 20 years, I'm aware that in the past we have restricted areas and we've reduced the times that dogs could be on off-leash, and we keep making the areas smaller and smaller for the residents to use. So again, it's not just, it's another. And the intent for some people here, I think, is they're never going to be happy until the dogs are on leash. Dogs are supposed to be on leashes. They're a detriment to the environment. They're a nuisance to people enjoying the beach. They want dogs on leash. Even some of them are dog owners that think dogs should always be on a leash. And that's not wrong. It's just a different point of view. But the point is a lot of us here live here so we can run our dogs on the beach. And we need that large area partly to get away from the people so the dogs aren't a nuisance and disrupting the people who are enjoying the beach. But we also need it for some people who have dogs that don't socialize well with other dogs that probably need their own space. So this is healthy for the dogs, as you've heard from the vets, but it's also healthy for us as residents. I mean, my wife and I get a 1.5 mile walk every day. And there's a lot of people that go back, they go in the morning and they go in the evening, back and forth. So it's a right and privilege that we have, we enjoy, that we treasure. So when this came up, I will admit that I was frustrated, disappointed, and angry. In part because I've been here in the past where, again, it's an effort to get dogs on leash, keep contracting the areas where they can run freely until the ultimate goal is to get them all on leashes year-round. And you can see this because we start out saying the problem is the dogs are off leash and they need to be on leashes. We start with a solution before we look at the problem. If we were really looking at the problem, what is the threat to the critical habitat areas and to the birds eating on, feeding on shore and nesting and resting? We'd be looking at everything that impacts their environment, not just starting off with the assumption it's the dogs off leash are the problem. Maybe they are a bit, but have you ever seen a golfer in the dunes? You guys seen golfers in the dunes? They get in there, it's not one, it's usually two of them. They have to march around in the dunes till they can find the white ball. And then when they get it with their wedge, and they just start whacking away till they get it back on the fairway. That happens when the wind's blowing the right direction, like it is this time of year and in the spring from the west to the north. The balls are ending up in the dunes all the time. And they're in there all the time. And I can tell you that putting up signs, somebody's paying $700 to play the golf cart, the ocean course, or whatever it is they pay, I don't know what it is. They're going to go in the dunes and they're going to hit the ball. Signs aren't going to work. They're going to have to throw them off the golf course to keep them out of the dunes. That'll be the only way we can get them out of the dunes. But that's not discussed here. It's not being considered here. There's no discussion about bikes. So we have the studies about walking with a dog on a leash, walking with dogs running freely. How many of us have seen bikes blast through the birds? What are we doing about the bikes? How about the runners? I mean, the runners do that too. I'm a runner.
I gotta admit, I run down the shore and run off birds. You know, they got these things called blow carts over at the club. They're the little wind sailing cars that go up and down the beach. I gotta imagine that's probably disruptive to a bird as well. Trucks. I mean, we've talked about the island's the town's trucks. I mean, you got the elevator, you got the umbrella guy with his truck and his rattling trailer behind. You got the DNR truck that goes back and forth there every once in a while. And you got the beach patrol that's driving up and down all day long, low tide, high tide. So what's the impact of a 6,000-pound truck driving within yards of a bird's nest or birds eating and feeding on the strand? And we've talked about the coyotes. Coyotes are related to the dogs. They're basically dogs, except they're not fed twice a day, and they're out there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and they're focused on three things: sleeping, breeding, and the rest of the time, eating. And if you guys are the biologists, I think you're trying to track them. When they find the shorebird nest, they're going to devour them. So I'm not sure why we have an invasive predator on the island that's a threat to these precious shorebirds. So I go back to why do we start with the assumption that dogs off leash are the problem, and we have to change that to protect the shorebirds, when all these other things are clearly are a problem and they're impacting their environment as well. We've said this before. You know, I come from the business world where you focus on proven facts, good data, robust analysis to solve a problem. I'm not seeing that here. What I'm seeing are solutions in search of a problem. And we do that a lot on Kiawah. So, one of the proposals is limit the dog leashes to 16 feet. In these studies, it show that dogs on leashes are perceived as less a threat to the shorebirds than dogs off leashes. What were the length of those leashes? Probably 6 feet, not 16 feet. So if we have a 16-foot leash with a dog jumping all around the owner on a retractable leash, is that going to negate the fact that he's on a leash from the perspective of the shorebirds? Do we know that? We don't know. So let's see. I think I said what I wanted to say. What I'd like to see is a more balanced approach into what these critical habitats or these temporary critical habitat areas are being affected by, and what we need to do, what we should do to try to protect them. But let's not start with the assumption that dogs off leash are the problem. Let's start that there's a lot of things impacting their environment. The other thing I would like to see from this group and from the town is a balanced approach. It's like, yeah, we need to protect the environment, but we also need to protect the residents. And so I would like to see permanent, so we don't see this every 5, 10 years, another contraction of the dog use areas and the dog times. I'd like to see something permanently put in. Because back to your point, and I thought of this too. Okay, if we really need to cut back the off-seasonal use by 2 weeks in the spring, then add it back in the fall. Nobody's here in October. I look at that when I go out in October, it's like, why can't we have the dog off the leash in October? There's nobody there. You know, if you're going to take one area and say, okay, we need this half mile for the critical habitat, we need to keep dogs and bikes and golfers and those all out of there, let's add it somewhere else. Let's add it back, maybe on the west side of the beach, where we have a lot of residents who don't want to come all the way to the east side. Let's take where the old inn is and make that an off-leash area. Instead of always taking away, if we really need to move it, let's keep it the same but move it around. It'd be hard, we'd have to do a lot of communicating, but I think the thought would be is that let's stop this slow, incremental constriction of our ability to let our dogs run free on the beaches here on Kiawah. That's it, thanks.
Thank you. Sally Starseld? I apologize if I mangled your last name.
Thank you. I wasn't planning on saying anything today, but there were a couple of things that came up that I did want to comment on. First of all, I want to thank all of those that have spoken against these proposed restrictions, including, I think your name is Brian. I'm not in his group, but you did a fantastic job on it. And want to reiterate that, as so many have said, there is no data to show, no information to show that the dogs on Kiawah are having a significant impact on the shorebirds on Kiawah. And until we have that information, you really should not be putting any restrictions on the residents of Kiawah and the property owners on Kiawah. But the other thing that I wanted to say was I've heard a couple times from the shorebird observers, stewards, volunteers. No, I understand that this is not a very big thing you are asking of dog owners, and you are wrong about that. This is a huge thing you're asking of dog owners. We've been here several years. We just adopted a dog rescued a dog from down further south in South Carolina. The only reason we can have that dog is because we could take her on the beach in Kiawah. Without that access to run as long and hard as she wants to, we can't have her. We couldn't have had her. Honestly, I don't know what we do. So the thought that, oh, the dog can wait another 2 weeks or can't go very far or doesn't going to be on the leash, that's unthinkable in some ways. So I ask you to understand that this is a big thing you're asking, not a little thing. It's not no big deal. It's huge. And while I understand that your perspective is more about shorebirds and not very much about dogs or big dogs or young dogs or dogs that run, it's a huge deal what you're asking. And I was kind of offended by that comment, obviously. So I ask everybody to consider that this is not a small thing you're asking. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. And Michael Milligan?
Thank you for having us this morning. Mr. Mayor, I want to thank you for creating the venue for this conversation because I think it's really illustrative of why, when you have circumstances that have competing virtues, we really have to invest in a rigorous investigation of the underlying facts and realities. Because when people care about things that are on both sides quite meaningful and virtuous, people tend to want to self-select those things that they think are most influential and meaningful, and there's a native human propensity to want to extrapolate to what will happen, what may happen, how bad things can be, and it's where we most of all need a real emphasis on true scientific rigor, which demands that observations get connected to outcomes with causality as the intersection. And what I would say, to be in full disclosure, I'm a dog owner, I'm an environmentalist, I'm a conservationist. And I believe strongly in the balancing and the harmony of those things. But as I think Brian spoke quite eloquently, to create the right kind of balance, we have to have a really rigorous understanding of the reality of the circumstances. And I would just say that having read the studies that were presented in detail, those studies did not even claim that dogs off leash deliver a reduction in shorebird population. It established some behavioral observations, but it did not establish any correlated outcomes, which were the reduction in the health and well-being of shorebirds. So not only did that not happen in Australia and Southern California, and not only were those studies confined to the particular geographies that they were studied and the bird populations that were involved, they don't take into account, as I think has been said quite well a number of times, the particular unique characteristics of this stretch of coastline, Kiawah specifically, and the way that Kiawah has already invested an enormous amount of time and energy in trying to create balance and harmony between the interests of the wildlife and, of course, and of course, dog owners. So I would just want to put my thumb on the scale again for what I think was a really thoughtful recommendation, which is to evaluate whether a really rigorous, scientifically defensible assessment of whether dogs on the beach in the unleashed area are directly contributing to the decline in shorebird population and well-being. And I think that can be done, and it can be done. Yes, it would take some time. It would take some funding, but it is not a vastly expensive activity. And it's critical before we allow regulations to take the rights of people and dogs away, because they are part of our community as well. I'll give two last illustrations and then I'll stop for why I think this is important, right? This, for one thing, one of the other important assertions about why this needs to happen is because we've seen the square footage, the acreage of the now designated critical habitat decline, and we believe that some of these other related areas, like the eastern end of the dog area, will ultimately become better and more suitable for nesting habitat. But there's no data on what the nesting density in the critical habitat was to begin with, and whether, in fact, that reduction between, I think, I won't get the numbers exactly right, but I think it was something like they were 60 some odd acres, and we think we're down to like 40 acres or something in that neighborhood. Whether that reduction in acreage has actually had any demonstrable effect on the nesting density of shorebirds, and whether the 27 nesting pairs of plovers can no longer nest in that area because it's now 30 acres or 40 acres instead of 60. These are things that rigorous scientific assessment can evaluate, and it might turn out to be that in expanding the dog area, contracting the dog park area would have absolutely no meaningful impact on our capacity to preserve and protect the nesting behaviors of shorebirds. So I just go back and say there are a number of things that can be evaluated in a more rigorous way that's specific to our environment. As I think a number of people have said, well, it's not a small issue to talk about taking away the 1.5% of the square footage of the island made available to dogs off leash, 10% of the beach, particularly for people who have dogs who are not capable of being carried around in a purse, but may require substantial exercise, vigorous running in large open spaces. So to contemplate that kind of change, which is significant, I think it demands that the town invest in real empirical support for the change.
Thank you. And that was the last name that we had on the sign-in sheet. So if there are other people who'd like to comment, please come forward. And if you would state your name, please.
My name is Arthur Wheeler. I live at 257 Surf Song Road. I'm a property owner for 20 years. I'm a full-time resident for the last 8. I have 2 grown daughters who have moved out of the house and been replaced, they would say, by 2 Labrador retrievers. I chose Kiawah for many reasons, nature being one of them, golf, the beach, and I spend 50% of my day with those dogs because the existing regulations that are here on the books do not allow my dog to step out the front or the back door unless they are leashed. I'm going to talk about 16 feet because I measured my leashes today, and I'm a proud owner of 2 25-foot retractable leashes. I use the beach, the off-leash section, only 2 times a week on average. I live in the middle of the island. I have to drive 5 miles to get there, 5 miles back. Let's not talk about what that does to the environment. And I own dogs that like to swim. There's no body of water that they can safely enter on the island, except for the ocean. And so this is the moment of joy they have, and I share it with them, and I want to continue to do that. So I am here to oppose the regulations that are being proposed. And I have 2 things I want to comment on. The leash length. I really don't see when 16 feet versus a longer leash is the problem or the issue. But I can only anticipate I'm going to have a fellow with a clipboard following me around issuing $200 tickets someday soon. It's a taking. What we had, you are trying to take from us. That's why you're getting this response. These are my children. If you want passion, try to take something from my children. The other thing I'm going to say is I ran into a gentleman on the beach the other day and asked, are you coming to the meeting? He said, no, I've read everything there is to know. I understand it completely. I've registered my remarks. He said, but I'll tell you the one thing that bothers me the most. He said that if this recommendation is accepted, if it is voted upon and approved by the next body, one of the items in the legislation is that the biologist for the town will have the sole right to make decisions going forward. No checks and balances, that individual. Now, highly respected, Jim, I have heard nothing but good things, but you're not here forever and this law will be here forever. And so who knows what the whim is of the next person and who knows what the next object of their concern is. Surf casting, kiteboarding, surfing, kayaking in the waves, it's all going to disturb nature in some way, and that there would be a law that allows a person to restrict again and again what we do on this island is upsetting to me. And that's why I come and sit in the back of the room for a couple hours waiting my turn. Thank you very much. I just would like for balance to be established. Some of the suggestions, if you're going to take 2 weeks here, why not give 2 weeks back? I've got a question. I've got to go to the far end of the island to take my dog off a leash. Is there something happening in the middle of the island that I'm not aware of? Are there more nesting grounds there? Or are you concerned with them bothering people? Because if you pull back on one end, why can't you expand on another to balance it? I see no reason. So I'm going to make my last remark, and I'm trying to do it as impassionately as possible. Somebody said, this is a slippery slope. I think it's a grease skid.
Thank you. And I think we have at least one more speaker.
Hi, Chris Rogers, 6 Ocean Course. I just have 2 quick points I'd like to add to the balancing. When we've all talked about coyotes, as far as I know, they're an invasive species in South Carolina, not welcome. We live on an island. It seems like it could be possible to eradicate or relocate them and eliminate that problem. Don't know why they're still here. Second is, we have done it before. We have tinkered with the east end of the beach. We've done it for the benefit of the golf course. It seems to me we should be looking at tinkering with it for the benefit of increasing the potential nesting habitat. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Okay, well, we've all devoted the last 3 hours of our lives to this. Thank you all very much.
Madam Chair, I can't resist.
Yes, I was going to absolutely give you the floor.
A very constructive series of comments, and I greatly appreciate it. I'm informed by information that I didn't have, and I'm informed by the passionate views on both sides of this issue. There are opposite sides in some respects, but I think the most important thing is I believe that everybody in this room that spoke today is committed to being a good steward of this island and all that entails. And I would stipulate that I believe with all my heart that every permanent resident on this island, including the dog owners, is just as committed to the protecting our natural habitat as anybody else. We have slightly different perspectives on how best to achieve that, slightly different interests, and everybody said we need to balance and compromise. I want to specifically comment on a couple of things that were raised just to highlight the challenges that all of this presents. One, the slippery slope issue and kind of can't we permanently put something in. I just looked at the statutes, and the last time this was changed was back in 2014 to expand the critical habitat area on the end of Sam Spit. And I'm not sure that anybody would really object to doing that action. Whether it was driven by robust data or not, I don't know, but this isn't something that's happening routinely. You also, it is a matter of state law that you can't bind future councils. So as much as you might like to put in some place something that's permanent, if conditions change, a new council comes in, they can change policy at that point in time. That's their prerogative. An issue about enforcement. Everybody wants more enforcement, but we have a resource constraint issue. So I was on with my little four-legged mini golden doodle yesterday on the off-leash area. We walked the 1.2 miles and back. I had a chance to chat with the beach patrol individual who was there on the island driving the truck. One person patrolling the island on a Sunday. That's it. 10 miles. You're driving 10 miles an hour when they're driving, so 2 hours to transit the beach, and then you get out and stop and talk to people. It's a challenge. Do people really want a dozen code enforcement officers on the beach? I suspect not. So again, there's got to be balance there. Blow a hole in the municipal budget. Not sure how we solve for that. The issue, what I've heard a lot of, is it's not the dog owners who are resident, their dogs are, even when off-leash, running into the dunes. I think that's a red herring argument. I don't believe there are dogs running in the dunes. Now, what the shorebird stewards would say, if dogs are simply running on the beach and there are shorebirds there, that will disturb those shorebirds. They'll lose their resting opportunity and they'll be chased away, and whether they come back or not. I defer to the science in some respects in that regard, but that doesn't mean, as other people have pointed out, that what is proposed is necessarily the appropriate solution to address that. Coyotes, I would let Jim, if he wants to talk about coyotes, either now or some other point in time. I think he may have, I don't know if you addressed it at the last council meeting. It's an issue we've talked about in senior staff meetings. They're part of the natural ecosystem. Are they invasive species? Yes, but I think there's only a handful, Jim. We only believe there's only a handful of coyotes right now, and they do help keep down the rodent population and everything, but yes, they do predate turtle nests. They do pose other risks, but simply eradicating them presents its own issues. I don't know, Jim, if you want to comment briefly on just how many coyotes we actually think we have on the island. It's not a huge number.
It's a good question. We've been here a long time. If I start talking about coyotes, we're going to be here for another 3 hours. But I will just make just a few statements. We estimate there are probably 1 to 2 pairs of coyotes on Kiawah. They breed once a year. They could have anywhere from 6 to as many as 8 or 10 offspring. Most of those offspring will leave Kiawah or die. Coyotes are incredibly territorial, so those breeding pairs will effectively exclude other coyotes, including their own offspring. So coyote populations are inherently stable until you start messing with them. And so if you were to remove the male or female from a breeding pair, then that territory becomes open to other coyotes moving in. In a lot of studies, coyotes numbers go up when you start doing manipulation. And just a couple more things. So, you always hear coyotes are invasive, they shouldn't be here. And I would say, coyotes have naturally moved to our area from the western U.S. They have done so because there is a void in our local ecosystem for that type of predator, right? We got rid of the red wolves, the mountain lions, all the other predators that used to live here. We got rid of them. And so there's a need in the ecosystem for a predator of that type for a lot of reasons. Coyotes stir up a lot of emotion, but at the end of the day, they're here to stay. They're in every state, every city in the contiguous 48 states. They've tried to wipe them out west with poisons and arrow gunning and trapping for 150 years and bounty programs. and there's just as many coyotes out west as there used to be, and now they've expanded out here. So finding a way to live with them is the best path forward.
Thank you. I'm just one vote on the council ultimately, and it's up to the environmental committee and the working group to ultimately make a recommendation to the council if they deem it appropriate to do so. My own view is that more work needs to be done, that there's more that probably can be done. There's a number of ancillary issues raised regarding overall management of the beach, access to the dunes. People have mentioned golfers, vehicles, storage of beach equipment. We've been talking about all those issues. We talked about the last council meeting, blow carts going up and down the beach. There are a bunch of trade-offs. And I don't know what the right answer is. We're going to continue to look at these issues. We discuss them in council meetings. We discuss them in senior staff meetings. We're not making decisions lightly or quickly. Ultimately, when decisions are made, and my job as mayor and a member of a council is ultimately to make a decision on some things. And what I've learned on this island is you can't please everybody. We can try as best we can to balance competing interests and considerations. I just want to thank Councilmember Kay and the town staff for putting this forum together. And I suspect that they're going to be going back to the drawing board to tweak this, that, or the other thing, and we'll see what happens if and when this comes to council, and you may have another opportunity to share the same comments you did today at a future date, so all our council members can benefit from that, but thank you.
Will it be a consideration of expanding leash-free area in West Beach?
So let me, my reaction to that, my sense is, but I don't know, Jim or Stephanie, if there's a history here, that the reason that off-leash area exists where it does now is because you don't have any development along that stretch. You don't have, chairs and tents set up and umbrellas set up along that area. The only area where that's partially true right now elsewhere on the island is in front of the undeveloped now where the Kiawah Island Inn used to be, although you do have people obviously coming in on Boardwalk 5, as well as the other end by the Timbers and Cape. Maybe there's a little stretch there, but that's going to be developed at some point. I think it's the only other area is on the other side of Beachwalker Park, and extending the mile down to the inlet. And my own sense and inclination would be that's an area where you'd actually perhaps further expand the critical habitat eastward to better protect Sam Spit as a natural habitat area. So I appreciate the suggestion. The practical issues involved with that, I think, are a challenge.
It's not an environmental challenge. There are people there.
I think that's as much as anything else. That's why I think we do have, I've been reading Seabrook's rules that we're sitting here, I'm reading everybody else's. We do have the most permissive set of the dog-friendly set of rules of almost any. Yes, we do. Read Seabrook's, we do.
Yes.
A lot do allow off-leash in the early mornings and late in the evenings.
Right.
But so that's obviously not in all areas, not in all areas, in certain limited areas. But that obviously is then, it strikes me, if you're basing it on hours, that's not an environmental issue, that's a people issue.
Right. So that's why I was suggesting, and I'm sorry, but on the West Beach, if it's a people issue, 7 to 9, it's just all we're asking is a couple hours.
And as somebody, again, I live on the very western end of the island, so we're on leash until the off-leash season. So yeah, that would, we can certainly look at that.
I have a map of Seabrook's rules if you're interested in taking a look. I also want to thank the members of the Environmental Committee who came by today because they'll be an essential part of the decision process going forward. Thank you all. We'll provide some additional follow-up and some additional opportunities. Really appreciate your engagement.
Thank you very much. Thank you.